Okay, it being 6:30, I'll call to order the meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education. It's Monday, October 26, 2020. We're appearing via Google Hangouts and conference call. We call the roll, Ms. Heights.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Mehring?
Here.
Flanagan?
Here.
Mr. Pankratz?
Here.
Ms. Bijak?
Here.
Mr. LeBrun?
Here.
Mr. Zach?
President, board has a quorum. I've received notice that the meeting's been appropriately noticed under Wisconsin Opens Meeting Law. Ms. Heights has it if anyone wants to inspect it. The agenda tonight contains our standard agenda items. In terms of action items, we are considering for approval the 2021 budget and the approval of the tax levy. We have informational items, school opening update, 2021 summer school report, report on professional development pathways, equity update and the superintendent's report. The conclusion of our regular agenda, the board will be moving into closed session and will not return to open session. I need a motion to approve the agenda as posted.
So moved. It's Krista.
A second, it's Troy.
Motion is second to approve the agenda. Call the roll.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Mehring?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Zach?
Yes, motion carries. We have an agenda. Item A under the agenda is consent calendar. Is there any item any member of the board wishes to have removed? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the items on the consent calendar. Is a motion to that effect?
This is Anna. I'll move approval.
Is there a second?
Heather, I'll second.
Heather with a second. Anna with the first. I'll note 3 donations: Stoughton Hospital, $500 for the Oregon Brooklyn Splash Pad, the Oregon PTO, $10,550 for Prairie View 2021 school year, and Mary Hermas, $100 for the A-Team scholarship. Thank you for your generous donations. Call the roll.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Mehring?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Zach?
Yes, motion carries. The consent calendar items are approved. Informational items. I think I'll go out of order. I've got several letters to read tonight, so I'll go. Andrew, let's go backwards like we did last time to get you off the hook early
Works for me.
for the student report. Okay, go ahead.
All right. Well, as I've learned, we are allowing small groups of students in tech classes like Woods to be allowed into the high school in these small cohorts so they can do their so they can do their workload. I think that's great and excellent. I think that's something we should embrace with open arms. I know I have a couple friends in those classes who are really excited to just be able to go back and actually do their normal classwork. I know, so as far as student council and stuff like that, we are looking at having a virtual homecoming week, and that is going to be the second week of November. So we're looking at doing some school-wide things so that we can kind of encompass everybody and create a sense of school community because there is no homecoming this year. Other than that, I know clubs are continuing to meet again. There's an NHS meeting in early November. I know the Multicultural Student Union at the high school is still meeting. And student council continues to meet among other things. I know Math Club is going to a virtual conference this Wednesday, so they're pretty excited about that. Other than that, I don't really have anything else to say except I did receive a letter from Mr. Akshuta, the AP psychology teacher, sent out to all the students and parents talking about the most recent test, which he said that there had been a 10% a 17% increase of scores. So the scores hopped up by 10% from 79 to 89, and it ended up hopping up a full letter grade. That's the highest he's ever seen in any year of his 13 years of teaching. And he's attributed this not to the fact that we're better students, but the fact that we have materials at our fingertips, which in that class, we have been advised not to take open note tests, which I think is for the best. Being an AP class, in May, we still have to take a in-person AP exam. So we will not be allowed to use resources there. And they're students who are basically breaking the academic integrity policy, but there's nothing that can be done about that. So I just think that's something that the board needs to be aware of, that I'm sure this is happening in other classes. And I think it's really hindering a student's ability to retain information because they know they can just pull it up from a study guide the day or during the test. Also, one thing I'm hearing, speaking of AP classes, is students are fearing that since AP classes are, or since AP tests are scored on a curve nationwide, that there are students in other states who are in person and can practice taking the or parts of the test in person, that they'll be more prepared in May than students who have spent much of the year virtually. So that's one thing that really is concerning them, that they're not really being set up to succeed in the best manner. But if you have any questions for me, I'd gladly field them now or by email. So other than that, I think I'm good.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Any questions? Okay, Jim and Leslie, I'm sure you'll get back to Andrew on a couple concerns he raised. OEA report. Laura, anything tonight? You indicated earlier you weren't going to.
Nope,
Have a
we are good
report.
to go. Thanks.
Okay, great, thanks. Then comments received from the public. I've got about 14. With this month's agenda, or this week's agenda, this meeting's agenda, I had invoked policy 180, which requires us to have a communication from the public, which we're not by law required to, but by board policy. The board has authorized that and require it, and sets 15 minutes for that, but it has discretionary limits on that. One is a 15-minute limit for comment from the public that's waivable by the president, but no more than 1 hour. We did that last time. Typically has been the case ever since I've been on the board, and before that, the general rule was if we were in person, we would do a 3-minute limit on people's comments to the board. I checked with several boards around the area that were doing some, and I heard at least one board was putting a word limit, so that we could fit all the comments within an hour, because last time we didn't do that. So we had put on the agenda that comments would go to Dr. Bergstrom and Katie, and that we would set a 250 word limit so that we could fit all the comments in. There were a couple that had come in before that limit had been set, so I'm going to read those. I'm going to redact one just a little bit, but the other ones I'll get through. So we'll be a little bit, there are about 14 of them. So off we go. This is from Donovan Gunderson. Dear board, I want to thank you for all your hard work and dedication over the past several months. It has not been easy for our country, state, city, and families in Oregon. I have been asked by several families here in the district to give my input, as I am an educator, preschool director, and a parent of a child who attends RCI. As an educator, I believe we need to do what is best for our children. Virtual learning is not optimal for our future generation. As a preschool director, if my center can stay open and fully operational, there is no reason why our schools need to be closed to the kids who are intended for. As a parent, it has not been easy to juggle 10-hour workdays to come home and also be my child's educator. It's in the best interest of the children. The school board needs to make the right decision to let the district have the choice to be virtual, hybrid, or in person. Virtual learning is a great way to teach children who cannot be in the regular classroom environment, but they do get the social and emotional learning. But do they get the social and emotional learning that is needed? The answer is no. Social and emotional learning is how students regulate their emotions, communicate with others, use compassion and empathy to understand the needs of others, build relationships, make good decisions. All these skills are essential for our kids, for them to be productive members of society, but sadly, they cannot build these skills in a virtual classroom. And what about our most at-risk students, the ones with special needs, one who don't have the means to do virtual learning, or kids don't have help at home? Who is there to help them? As an educator, we need these children back in school to get them the education they need to be successful. Our school buildings are sitting empty right now when they could be helping our most at-risk students. On top of the social and emotional well-being of our kids, what about their physical development? Being stuck at home in front of a computer screen is not healthy. These kids are overeating and not getting the exercise they need, which causes obesity, which can lead to other health problems. USD's original plan was to slowly bring in younger grades and kids with special needs. Why is this not being extended to older grades? Student parents need to be able to have the choice on whether to send their children to in-person learning, hybrid, or all virtual to do what is best for their child's learning. As a preschool director, we do not have the choice to do virtual learning because it is not possible to care for the children over the internet. The center I work at closed their doors for backup 2 weeks later. We had a lot of changes. We had to make a lot of changes on how we run our day-to-day operations, like taking children and teacher temperatures, and assessing their health before they enter the program, changing our sick policy, not allowing parents in the building, teacher proper hand washing and cough techniques, wearing personalized protective equipment, adopting cleaning and sanitizing procedures, lowering class sizes, splitting playgrounds, putting up barriers, not mixing groups of kids, and teaching kids to socially distance are just a few of the policies we had to implement. These early childhood educators can do all these things and still be able to teach and have a positive learning environment. Our school district can do the same. I know you're going to ask who's going to pay for these extra supports. Well, if we want our kids to be safe in the school district, is going to have to put up the budget to allow for more health screening tools and PPE. I'm not going to lie and say I wasn't scared, because I was, having a husband who recently had a brain aneurysm followed by a stroke, who also has high blood pressure, and a son who has asthma. I wanted to stay home and keep them safe, but in my family situation, that is not an option. I needed to go to work to pay my bills and take care of my family. Teachers are going to have to do the same, like going back to in-person teaching and adjusting the way they do things, just like the rest of us have been doing since this pandemic has begun. If preschools and private schools can do it with children who cannot wear a mask or control their body fluids, so can public schools. Virtual learning has been very difficult for my own child who attends RCI. Back in March, every day was a struggle to even get him to do any type of schoolwork. We did not have the internet for a while because we were moving. The laptop we were using was not the greatest, and on top of it all, me and my husband were working outside of the home, so there's no one to help him. The day usually ended with a screaming match, and both me and my child in tears. This fall has been somewhat better with Zoom meetings, but are the kids really learning anything from this? I watched my child try to do online learning, and it was difficult for me to witness being an educator. His trouble staying focused because of all the distractions at home. He cannot sit for that amount of time. And I've come home and try to help him with his homework because he cannot get a hold of anyone at the school. Virtual learning is not the optimal learning environment for our students. That is why we need a choice on how we want our children to be educated. I know my fellow educators are scared to bring children back to in-person learning. It comes with a lot of changes and a lot of extra work, but do they really like teaching virtually? Every teacher, parent, and child I've spoken to about online learning has told me that they hate it. In the best interest of our children's mental and physical health, our children need the choice to learn in person, hybrid, or virtual. Thanks for letting me voice my concerns. Sincerely, Oregon School District parent. Thank you very much, Donovans. And by the way, I'm reading these in the order that we got them. And we have a couple longer ones because that came out before the policy shift. This is from Kim Palmer. It's a long one. There's a couple places where I'm just going to reference the citations to, just in the interest of getting this tonight in within an hour. All of you have had a copy of this, I believe, and it will be posted to you. Dear Mr. Zock, I'm writing to share with you something which has been on my mind great deal since the beginning of the COVID shutdowns, and which has only grown more worrisome with time, and the continued unmoving stance of Public Health, Madison-Dane County, with respect to reopening schools for in-person educational options. I believe that the position Public Health Dane County Madison has held to is focused on a single aspect of health, keeping Dane County safe from the spread of COVID. This is an important aspect of their responsibility. Where I see their position failing the schools of Dane County is that the single aspect approach neglects the whole child emphasis, which is the Oregon school districts, one of the Oregon school district's core values. Let's face it, we are failing our children on so many levels. Their academic growth is being stunted. I worry that my own child will not be fully prepared to meet the challenges he will face next year when he heads to a very difficult university setting. I worry that he will not be able to perform well on AP exams in the spring as his peers, many of whom have been schools where the full student body has met in person 5 days a week. He's very concerned he will not be able to maintain his 4.0 GPA this virtual school setting, where he spends hours and hours in front of a screen instead of interacting with teachers. School has never been a struggle for my son. This year, the frustration with online classes and the feeling that his last day of school with his classmates was likely last March read clearly on his face every day. But this is not about academics. This is about the unformed consequences that COVID shutdowns have had on our children. This is about what you as a school board can do to mitigate the fallout from the past 7.5 months of isolation. Last Monday night's board meeting, Krista Flanagan pointed out that COVID is just one of the many things going on in the world today, and that puts stress on children and families. She is right. She asked, when did the school suddenly be responsible for every piece of a child's mental health because we are virtual or not? The answer to that question is very simple and very complicated at the same time. Of course, our schools are not responsible for assuring every aspect of mental health for children. It is preposterous to assign such a huge responsibility to any one entity. The role of schools and your role as a school board member is such greater than mental health alone. That saying goes that it takes a village to raise a child. Schools are only one part of that village. Still, they are the most critical part of that village when they become the front line in recognizing and reporting the failings of other parts of the village. For so many kids, school is their safe place. Their teacher is the one adult who cares for them. My teacher neighbor described to me how she would see bruises or the vacant looks in her students' eyes. She'd observe how they would hoard snacks from her cupboard when they thought no one was looking. They would devour their lunches or sometimes stuff bits of lunches into their pockets to take home. These things are impossible to see through a 2-inch square on a monitor screen. She told me that her students frequently only appeared on screen as a black box with a name in it, making it even harder to identify suffering children. True, she is an MMSD teacher, but these things exist in Oregon as well. Teachers and other school personnel are key in identifying and reporting child abuse and neglect. Child Welfare League of America says that teachers make up the biggest percentage of reporters. In fact, approximately 25% of child abuse cases are reported by schools. Then Ms. Palmer quotes a Washington Post article with a link to it, and board members and Dr. Bergstrom and administration, you will have that talks about kids who are abused. There's also a link to Stat News talking about children who have died from abuse and neglect, and citing some statistics in there. And there's a cite to a Chicago Tribune article in there, a cite to a Wisconsin Journal article reporting suicides up in Dane County. That's one that all board members have seen and been passed along to us, particularly about the rate for children from up to age 24. So there's a site there, and there's a site from Fort Worth, Texas, and some quotes from that, from Kansas City, and then also one from the Des Moines Register, and then a July Channel 3000 report. So there are a bunch of links in there with some summaries. And then the final comment from Ms. Palmer. Let me get back to Krista's question, when do the schools suddenly be responsible for every piece of a child's mental health because we are virtual? Not, they never did. Schools alone cannot be responsible for every aspect of a child's mental health, but when you each signed on to become a member of the Oregon School District Board of Education, you committed to looking out for the children of our committee. You accepted the core values that the district emphasizes, and you became responsible for doing your part to protect the whole child. Public Health Madison-Dane County has a responsibility to look at ways to prevent the spread of this virus. You have a much greater responsibility. It is to recognize the mounting body of evidence that shows that the unforeseen consequences of virtual learning far outweigh and outnumber the risks of COVID virus on the youth of Oregon. But ask that you email be read into the record. Thank you very much. An October 24th letter from Jamie and Miranda Bush. Dear Mr. Carr and Oregon School District Board, as you are most likely aware, we are writing as parents of 3 OHS student athletes, Haley Deacon and Quinton Bush. We are very frustrated with the district's commitment to following Dane County Public Health guidelines for school reopening. We are also highly disappointed that the Oregon School District is choosing to suspend sports further after the Badger Conference canceled official events. We believe that safely planned and executed school, other extracurricular activities, and sports competitions can and must be resurrected. This letter is to note our thoughts specifically on sports. We believe practices and competitions can happen with the unafraid leadership of coaches, the informed participation of athletes and parents, scientific studies that prove that athletics are not responsible for the spread of COVID-19. As coaches ourselves, as well as our present parents, we have been fortunate to have the resources and tools to encourage our kids to limit screen time, adopt an attitude of resiliency, try new things, and let go of fear of the unknown during this pandemic. We have taken the opportunities to learn and bond more as a family. We are certainly not dwelling in negativity and are grateful for the hard work, the amazing teachers of the district. Yes, our kids are missing out. They are missing rites of passage, fun, friendship, accountability, among other things. At this point, this has gone further than just missing out on some fun experiences. As this continues for an absurdly long amount of time, there will be lasting long-term effects on our younger generations. The growth that sports and other extracurricular activities promote for teens cannot be mimicked or replaced in the home. These opportunities build character and are foundational for practicing relational habits. In the short term, there are many challenges due to boredom and lack of structure. These can include situational depression, lack of motivation, hopelessness, isolation, and alcohol and drug abuse. These are not to be ignored, and as the pandemic continues, should be regarded as very serious by the district. Many studies have shown that teens who engage in extracurricular activities, included but not limited to sports, have less drug and alcohol problems as well as lower suicide rates. Also, teens benefit and thrive from the mentorship and life accountability of other adult leadership and coaches, teachers, advisors, etc. So our question is, when will the district consider the health and wellness of the students? Our plea is that you will act fast to ensure that these issues do not become the next great problem, with kids' mental, emotional, and physical health being compromised in order to protect what Dane County Public Health considers the greater good. Our kids need interaction, support, mentorship, and opportunities to build character. They need to have some structure and normalcy. This has been long enough, and with the scientific studies that I know many have referenced in previous letters, it is clear that as a district, we can break away from Dane County Public Health and the Badger Conference to make our own educated decisions. We have had a strong faith in the district and sincerely desire for all of our kids to graduate as proud OHS Panthers. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate you reading. Sincerely, Jamie and Miranda Bush. Thank you for your input. From Karina Osborne, I am emailing you in regards to having the choice to go back to school. I want to go back to school because it is super hard to learn in online learning. This is because of multiple reasons. The first is that the internet can get really bad. Last week, my connections teacher who works at school got kicked out of the meeting 3 days in a row. I have also been kicked out of multiple meetings over the course of 1 week. The second issue I have with online learning is that it is super disengaging. This is because the meetings are mostly just lectures with very little interaction, and also because there's no social aspect of class. Half the time, almost everyone's camera are off. This morning in history, there were 4 cameras on out of almost 30 kids. It is extremely boring to look at, and I often have moments where I stop paying attention because I lose focus in the boring meeting. The last reason that online school has been an issue is that I am not learning as much, if anything, in class. We are limited in what we can do, and it is extremely hard to ask and get an answer in a timely fashion. Overall, online school has not been very beneficial. and I think it is necessarily we should have the choice to go back. Karina Osborne. Thank you, Karina. Good evening. My name is Jamie Hans. I live in Fitchburg, and my son attends FES in phased restart. I think the OSD has done a fantastic job in balancing the needs of its students, staff, and community. I appreciate the massive undertaking it has been to pivot in this pandemic. I believe that restricting in-person learning to take K2 is necessary in lines with current education and public health expert opinion. I thank you for not succumbing to the pressure to implement an opening plan that goes against expert opinion. I do have, however, two asks. First, I'd like the administration to consider continuing the general notification of COVID case emails for the entire district. I appreciate that we will still be notified of cases in our child's school bus, but I believe it is beneficial for families to know where cases are occurring within the district, especially for families in the Oregon online program. Second, I think the community would benefit from improved communication and additional, perhaps unprecedented transparency around obstacles to opening K-12. In addition to public health guidance, substitute teacher availability, staffing, space, and capacity are surely an issue. I'm sure there is a working plan that highlights and addresses these restrictions. While these conversations wouldn't normally be shared with the community, my hope is that an exception could be made in these extraordinary times to help the community understand the scope of these decisions. Thank you for your time tonight and always. My name is Ellie Osborne, and I'm a fourth grader in Brooklyn Elementary School. I would like the letter below read at the school board meeting. I would like to go back to school. This is important because of lots of reasons. Number one, your hands get tired in your head and brain. This is because you stare at a screen all day. You have to do lots of trackpad clicking and dragging. You get sleepy through a meeting because how long you stare at a screen. I love school. You get to see lots of friends and you learn new fascinating stuff. Well, it's not as much like that online. You only see your classmates and more than half your class is off the screen. So you have a 50% chance of seeing your friends. You only get half the experience. You have to do science on Monday and Tuesdays, no writing on Monday and Tuesday with a sad face, emoticon. And you have writing on Thursdays and Friday and nothing on Wednesday. No live meets, you're on your own. You do your math and reading and optional activity. Ella Osborne. OSD, I have requested in writing previously and again requesting in writing, you vote as a board about bringing the kids back to school. The community deserves to know how the board feels about providing in-person education to this community. The new rules about the number of words we as a community are allowed to use when addressing the board is a disturbing new requirement. Our ability to speak at meetings has been stripped and our ability to write in has now been stifled. I am requesting you allow your community to use as many words as they deem necessary to speak their opinion regarding the course our schools are taking. It seems to me children getting 35% of the in-person education required by the Department of Public Instruction is a very big deal and should be corrected as soon as possible. Those of us that continue to write in are offering assistance, providing research, giving testimony of personal experiences with virtual learning, and offering to help prepare the schools for kids. Why would you want to limit our words of support? Malia King. Thank you, Malia. I would really appreciate the below statement to be read aloud from Martha Klug. As a parent of children in the Oregon School District, I wanted to state my support for the decisions the administration has made regarding in-person and virtual learning during the pandemic. Some people have been vocal about their stance to get students into the classrooms. I want to acknowledge that their concerns with virtual learning are valid. In particular, the effort to create an equitable experience for every child is a large challenge. However, giving OSD families the option to gather indoors in large number creates an alarming and undeniable health risk for the entire community. The need to send students back to school in a manner that minimizes risk does not discredit the obstacles we face with so many students learning virtually. Students should return to school in person as soon as they are able to do so safely. That doesn't have to mean a COVID-free world. I ask that the school board and administration continue to look to government agencies in charge of public well-being and experts capable of guiding schools to open as they are safely able to do so. I don't think our goal as a community is that varied. We want kids back in school and we care about the wellness of our community. Send students back is an oversimplification of the considerations and practicalities that will go into a decision regarding in-person school. Thank you for listening, hearing, and making difficult decisions in the best interest of your youngest community members, Martha Klug. Thank you, Martha. Dear School Board, based on the information that I'm seeing and hearing, I think it is very unfair to have kids out of school currently. I think that by the end of the second quarter, we should at the very least, have a hybrid school option. Based on the information that I know, if I or anyone my age had contracted coronavirus, we would probably get a little itchiness in our throat, unlike older people or people with special conditions. In terms of school, I look at the coronavirus like a mild flu. When someone gets the flu in our school, we don't shut everything down. We keep it open and eventually it will pass through the school and be gone. Now, if you say that the higher risk is the elders, you're right, but the same goes for the flu. The flu kills the elder and people with special conditions too. Therefore, I think that all schools need to go back in person. Sincerely, 8th grade OSD students. By an 8th grade student, getting kids back to school, screen time. In school, we talk about cutting out screen time while on screens for most of the day. The suggested amount of time is less than 1 hour of screen time. I've been counting my hours of screen time for school and it's been close to 8 hours of just school screen time. Other things that are in person. My sister is back in school in Evansville 5 days per week, which is 8 miles away from our house. My friend who lives 3 miles away and who I see at dance every week is also back at school 3 days per week at Evansville. Evansville is going great. Some have had COVID, but they have recovered quickly without any hospitalization or bad sickness. I have been able to go back to dance in Oregon since June. Everything has been going great. We are practicing safety procedures like masks and cleaning a lot to be safe. There have been 1 to 2 families in my dance studio that have gotten COVID from other places. This has not spread throughout the studio because they are careful and stayed home for 2 weeks. My next door neighbor, who was in 2nd grade, went back to school at Brooklyn Elementary. I understand they need to be back because they don't know a lot about technology and problem solving, but 3rd through 12th grade has not even gotten the choice to go back. I think that as you get older, all the way up until high school, our education becomes more important because college is getting closer. My experience with virtual school. My days are busy with all the schoolwork and my activities. In my experience, it is overwhelming with all the stuff and long lists of things to do. There have been times when I've had to finish my assignments at 10 p.m. after dance. If I were in person, I would have a separate space from home and school to do my work. If I didn't finish my assignments while I was in classroom, my teachers would say, "Don't worry, we'll finish it tomorrow," or they would grade it with the work I had completed. Only some of the final tasks I would need to take home to finish. I've noticed that my teachers have a lot more work as well, and they're so grateful and happy to see us. I think that they would prefer to be in school too. My teachers talk about how seeing our faces is motivating, and when classmates turn their cameras off, my teachers lose motivation to teach a blank screen. High school board, I opened enrolled to Evansville because I wanted to be in person. I think that the people who want in person should have the choice of going to school. I like Evansville being open so that I can make new friends. I only have to wear a mask and stay 6 feet apart, and I got to meet new friends. It is hard being virtual because parents go to work at 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. and those kids are left alone, a 4th grade student. Karen Taylor, Dr. Bergstrom and the Oregon School District Board. 25% of the school year has passed. My junior and freshman have not set foot in OHS. Traditional school activities such as Spirit Week or watching, playing in the sporting event hasn't happened. Counties with similar demographics 1 hour away have opened their high schools. Students there are thriving and have adopted to safety protocols. High schools intended to prepare students for college. If Oregon continues its path of virtual learning, our students will not compete academically. Teen suicides are up 90%. Social isolation is devastating. As the leaders of OSD, how is this acceptable to you? COVID is not going away. COVID will mutate and be here in some form for the rest of our lives. If you continue to follow public health Madison-Dane County guidelines, my junior will most likely not see the inside of high school again. He will graduate with a mere 1.75 years of in-person high school. This is unacceptable. Dr. Bergstrom, please find the courage to pivot away from public health Madison-Dane County guidelines. Focus on an alternative source of medical expertise supported by current science that results in a safe return to in-person schooling. Neighboring schools have demonstrated it can be done. My voice is not the only voice calling for choice. Students have presented to you using current science. Let's return our teenagers to high school where they can prepare for the future that lies ahead. Move beyond public health Madison-Dane County to an alternative set of medical data for the sake of our teenagers. Dear Dr. Bergstrom and school board members, I was moved to write when I peeked into my 8th grade daughter's room last week to make sure she was awake for school. The look on her face was one of pure sadness, dejection, and resignation. Furthermore, my 2 OSD children have received multiple disturbing, dangerous social media messages that have been investigated by OHD. It's clear that the lack of safe social in-person routine is contributing, not helping to lessen kids' psychological stress. Though I realize that in-person school is not a cure-all, I find it tragic that our kids have to suffer in isolation when doing so is scientifically unwarranted. Please consider the following. The Great Barrington Declaration, co-authored by epidemiologists at Harvard, Oxford, and Stanford University, states, keeping students out of school is a grave injustice. Keeping these measures in place until a vaccine is available will cause irreparable damage, with the underprivileged disproportionately harmed for children. COVID-19 is less dangerous than many other harms, including influenza. The New York Times published an article on October 22, which makes the assertion researchers once feared that school reopenings might spread the virus through communities, but so far there is little evidence that it's happening. The article quotes several medical experts who make the case for safe in-person school. There is no easy answer, but my daughter's face was crying out for a solution that science and evidence would seem to support. Sincerely, John Bergstrom, Oregon. Thank you. My name is Jenny Fahey, and I have sons in the Oregon School District. I'm writing to request that the school board votes and decides in the future plans for in-person, hybrid, or all virtual education, rather than at the sole discretion of the superintendent. Being elected and sitting on the school board brings the responsibility of making tough choices that affects the entire district. I'm also urging the superintendent and school board to form a medical advisory team for a district rather than following Dane County Public Health. Dane County Public Health has created a very strict matrix that outlines when they believe it's safe for school to reopen. However, they have chosen to ignore their own matrix for a 4K2 grade. Dane County Public Health apparently picks and chooses which of their own standards they want to follow. Therefore, the obscure numbers for opening grades 3 to 12 stand. It's obvious that COVID-19 is a major health concern, and decision around reopening schools should not be taken lightly. However, I'm asking the board to consider reopening in a hybrid fashion, just as other schools around our district have. Cases will come just as they have in the community. The answer isn't to close down and leave our students behind, but create a safe reopening plan that entails protocols for exposure, just like what's already taking place for 4K-2. It's disappointing that these plans were not already created and outlined as we are approaching 7.5 months since schools closed in March 2020. Thank you. And that's from Jenny Fahey. Amanda Payne, hello. I have children in first grade in 4K and OSD and want to take a moment to thank the school board and administration for making tough choices in this very challenging situation. I see the Bring Kids Back signs around town and imagine that you must be under immense pressure from all sides. I certainly understand the desire of some community members to reopen schools. Virtual learning is difficult and none of us are happy about all that our kids are missing out on by not being in school. I know this from experience because I chose the Oregon online pathway for my first grader. I also recognize that some parents are concerned for the mental health of our students, but I have full confidence that our administration and school board see the risks and will do all they can to support students' mental health. Right now, the most important thing is to protect the health and safety of our students, teachers, families, and community as a whole. Kids are resilient and they will get through this, as will we all, and perhaps come out even stronger as long as we keep them safe. Cannot risk lives to open schools prematurely, no matter how much we all wish that life could go back to normal. I'm so grateful that our school board and administration are following guidance from public health experts. Thank you for protecting our children and community. Amanda Payne. Oregon School Board, thanks for your service in dealing with the many concerns related to the pandemic and its effect on our community. In March, you reacted quickly to the perceived threat of COVID. Closing was accepted as necessary because we didn't know much about the virus or how it spread. We thought the closure would be for a limited time. Teachers had a difficult task switching to virtual and did the best they could, but children lost out on much of the rich multidimensional learning that they need. Now we know more about the situation. COVID's a respiratory virus spread by airborne particles. We know how to reduce and prevent that spread. We also know the time frame to virus elimination is much longer than expected, vaccine or no. We cannot keep our children away from school indefinitely. They need to be with their teachers and their classmates for better learning, better mental, emotional, social health, and a little risk to their physical health. Please transition Oregon School District children safely back into the classroom as safely as possible. 3 of my grandchildren live in Chanhassen, Minnesota. Since early September, the younger 2 are in school full-time and the 7th graders doing hybrid at school 2 days per week with no problems. This should be possible in Oregon. Some families and teachers may not be comfortable sending kids back. Could these children continue virtual learning matched with those teachers? Other families and teachers greatly desire a return to in-person teaching. Could those children be paired with those teachers? A choice should be available to best meet the needs of all the students you represent. Christine Sager. Oregon School Board. This spring, I pulled my son from the Oregon School District and have decided to homeschool him indefinitely. I did so because I am extremely disappointed in the apathetic leadership of the school board and superintendent and the incredibly restrictive and unnecessary public health policy put in place. In the spring, I was told that students attending Oregon 4K would be virtual with 2 hours a week of unmasked group learning. Under the state order, children under the age of 5 are not required to wear masks. They are able to attend in person. Unacceptable. Why are Oregon's policies more restrictive than Dane County and the state? After I was made aware of the restrictive policy in Oregon, I was told by friends outside of our district that most of the schools around us had students in 4K attending 4 days a week in person. It was incredibly disappointing to know that I had better options than the Oregon School District. I was left with no time to enroll my son into another district. Our school district has acquiesced and given all their power to public health. They've allowed public health to take the blame and pressure off of them. School district that would let our children fall to political pressure is not a district deserving of the responsibility of educating our children. Lift your restrictive policies before young families like mine flee for safer waters. Kimberly Smith. Thank you to everyone for writing in and providing us with your feedback and input. A copy of these will be given, if not already, to all the board members for their review and to the administrative team, and then posted to the extent they don't have confidential information under FERPA. So that completes our informational items. That takes us to action items, and that takes us to Andy on our last step in approving a 2021 budget. So Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Zock. I'm going to try to present here from a different computer, so it looks like it's coming up. All right. So a couple opening comments about this budget, which probably is no surprise to anyone. This is a very unusual budget, as we're working through a very unusual school year. So lots of things are changing, and they're constantly changing, and that has an impact on how we work through the budget. To give you some examples of that, we are currently developing our third set of bus routes for third through fifth or third through sixth grade students potentially coming in the near future. That we want to have that ready and available as soon as we're given the go-ahead to do that. So what that has as an impact is the first set of bus routes, we were not spending our total budget. Second set of bus routes, we're pretty much right on budget. Third set of bus routes, we're hoping to stay on budget, but the fourth set of bus routes, when we potentially add the upper children, potentially could actually exceed our budget for that part of the year. So just kind of keeping that in mind, that things are constantly changing for us. Another thing that changed for us is completely outside of our control. We were doing some things with food service where we were doing a transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 50 in order to make that work. And then on October 1st, the federal government decided to change their food service program until actually September 2021. And basically, our food service program has taken off. And because of that, we're not going to need that transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 50 anymore. So, which has a significant impact on our overall district finances. So those are some examples of things that have changed over the last month or so that have significant impacts in our budget process. As it looks like today, I would say that our budget has the resources to get through the year that we're anticipating. We have lots of different things that are still not utilized in the budget, but I would say that what's interesting in this budget is having to kind of forecast into the future. We didn't spend, for instance, a significant amount of money on summer school in the budget this year because we didn't have a very significant we didn't have a personal summer school. It was all online. And so there was $450,000 that wasn't spent in the summer school area. But that has an impact on us, the way the revenue limit works, and that we're not going to have those FTE associated with that summer school program next year when it starts working into our funding sources. So we have to kind of think through things long term, not just in one particular year. With that said, I'm going to just go ahead and start talking a little bit about the budget timeline, just as a review for everyone. Our major milestones, and there's a little bit more detail in the budget packet that was in the agenda item for you. But major budget milestones are in January, February each year. We're kind of looking at enrollment. We're looking both at our residential enrollment as well as open enrollment spaces and trying to get a feel for those things. And then we're also giving departments and schools kind of their budget targets for the year. Those budget targets are, those budget allocations are fairly small in the scope of the budget. And I'll show you that a little bit down the road here into the agenda item. March and April are, pretty much focused on staffing discussions, trying to project what those enrollments mean as far as what we need for staffing for the next year. Spring and summer, the schools are kind of finalizing their budgets, getting those kind of worked out and for the following year so that ordering can be placed in the summer. August, we're setting our preliminary budget, kind of getting a feel for what's going on as far as enrollments and trying to forecast that into the revenue side of things. September, the enrollments are known at the end of the month. We're doing our budget hearing and an annual meeting as we did in the last month. And then October brings us to tonight, where we're basically approving the final, what's called the original budget in the school district in Wisconsin and our tax levy so that we can send that information to our municipalities. So just a real high level thing as far as how the budget's looking this year. This does include all funds, so that kind of hides some things or brings some things together. So I'll try to explain those to you real quickly. The first one is head count. That's the number of students we're actually serving. So that's different than our membership count, which drives about 90% of our revenues. I'll show you that in a second too. But you can see that for the most part, we held very constant with our enrollments, or the number of students that we were serving this year compared to last year. We're just down -1 at the time that we did this, which is around the third Friday in September. Our expenditures, you might be surprised that you'd see a 26% decrease in expenditures. That's nothing to be worried about. That has everything to do with Fund 46 for our budget, which is the construction of Forest Edge Elementary. The majority of those expenditures were last fiscal year, and so as we're finishing up, we still have some expenditures, but nowhere near what we were spending last year. The revenue is a little bit better of a measure for what's going on with the budget. Typically, you don't have those swings in expenditures. However, we have kind of an unusual situation where we sold the bonds to build Forest Edge last year, and because of that, one of the financing things that happens when you sell bonds is that we received a premium on those bonds, and so that was recognized as a revenue last year, and that's marked on the bottom there of about $1.5 million. So if you back that out, you'll see that there is a significant increase in revenues this year compared to last year. State aid, we see about $453,000 more in revenue from the state aid, and that helps lower our tax levy had it not been there. Our tax levy did go up. A good portion of that, over 5%, was related to the override that was approved by constituents back in 2018, when we also approved the construction of Forest Edge Elementary. The levy rate is a factor of basically the state aid and the equalization values. Both of those came in better than anticipated, even a month earlier. And I'll talk about that in a second, but basically our levy rate is going to be a cent less than last year. And again, that's a factor of significant increase in equalized assessed value, as well as the additional state aid that we were a little off on our estimate for. So this just gives a kind of a trend for what's been happening in revenue for the school district. Our major revenue is always related to enrollment in our school district. So that's why we start with our budget projections based on enrollment, is because it drives everything, it drives over 90% of our revenue. So these are the adjustments that are given per student over the last, looks like about 8 years or so. And you can kind of see two different components to that. One political party likes to favor one area, and another political party kind of favors another area. But the per pupil allocation is just an allocation that's given per student. And then the per revenue limit is based on also per student, but it's based on the number of students that are in the revenue limit or our membership, the number of residents that we have in the district. So you can see that last year was actually a fairly decent year because you could add both. We had both last year. We had a per student allocation, categorical aid of $88, and then we had a revenue limit increase of $175. So we were, in that $260 range last year. This year we're about $179. I think it's important to just mention, and I put this in the agenda item, that from a percentage basis, it's very, very small amount. We're still in the 1 or 2% range each year. And we have to kind of live within that each year as we build our budget. So trying to show kind of a trend for membership a little bit and head count, and they are two different things. Our head count is, again, the number of students that we're serving on an annual basis. Our membership is the number of residents that we have. And then there's the revenue limit, which kind of, again, determines about 90% of our revenue. Has a 3-year averaging component to it. So I want to talk about those pieces real briefly. You can see a very strong trend over the last several years as far as enrollment or head count. We've been increasing the number of students that we've served. This last year, obviously, we're pretty much even from the 1920 school year. Our membership's been steadily increasing, and maybe not as much in the last couple of years, but this year it's hard to tell from this, but our membership's actually slightly down, about 14 or 15 students, I believe. So our count date from September is down slightly. But because the last 2 years, and you can see those with the red bars for 17-18 and 18-19 and 19-20, because those, I'm sorry, the 18-19, 19-20, those 2 years were actually increasing still. Our 3-year average actually still increased this year slightly. So that's a good thing. It's just that the number that's in there for this year, for the 2020 year, will impact us down the road. So our 3-year average won't have as of a build to it as we get into the next school year. So that's something to be cognizant of. And then the 3-year average, you can kind of see that it's still going up from this last year if you look real closely, but it now has that lower number in it for the following year. So open enrollment has become a larger component of our budget over the years. I think we're in the 250 or so range as far as more students coming in than leaving. You can kind of see where those districts are, or where those students are going to and coming from, with Madison being a major increase in our district, or a major place where students come from, with a slight increase this last year from last year, about 10 more students. And then you can kind of go down the road. Just a note, the McFarland School District has 2 line items going out. One is related to something called Burmeister Woods. That's an area that is fairly close to McFarland School District that we worked into a intergovernmental agreement so that those students could go either to Oregon or to McFarland, and we pay the open enrollment amount for them. Just outside the open enrollment process, but we handle it the same way at the request of McFarland School District. So you can see, though, if you look at the chart to the left side here, that we've had a fairly steady increase the last couple of years. And that was actually a strategy as we were seeing our enrollments maybe not coming on as strong as we thought, to open enrollment a little bit more this summer so that we could kind of balance things. And that did help us this year. So I'll go to the next slide. Equalized values. We talked a little bit about this at the annual meeting. Basically, I was thinking it'd be around 5%, so I was off a little bit. I knew that number was conservative. However, what was kind of hidden in the numbers was Fitchburg. Fitchburg's, when I'm looking at those numbers, I have to look at a municipality as a whole. And most of us know that Fitchburg actually has 3 school districts in it, and I couldn't see that from that data. So that hid a significant increase. Fitchburg actually increased in the assessed value more than Oregon. The Village of Oregon increased by itself. So our portion of Fitchburg increased more than Village of Oregon. So that had a significant impact and did drive the levy rate down a little bit. Equalization aid has been steadily increasing. You do see, obviously, the impact of the last recession a few years ago. That 10-11 dip was fairly significant for us, but we've been climbing up since then. And the total levy has been increasing. A good portion of that, as I said before, 5 of the 7% increase this year is related to the override limit that was approved in 2018. And then you can see the rate and what the impact has been on the rate over the last couple of years. Again, holding pretty much steady, but down over the all, which is great when we've actually improved our the number of schools that we have, as well as opening that building. So this is my favorite sheet, and I'll spend a few minutes on it, but I know it's getting to have too many numbers on it, so I apologize that. But the reason it's my favorite sheet is it shows everything going on in all the funds in the school district in one place. So you don't have to flip back and forth or anything. It starts with a fund balance from the beginning of the year, talks about the revenues expenditures as we move to the right. If there's any transfer, and talk about that real briefly, and then where we anticipate we'll be at the end of the year. This just does some math between beginning and fund balance at the end. General fund is our main fund of the district that really runs 90% of everything that we do. And I did mark out the different assigned fund balances in that that are related to money that was unspent from the prior year for different purposes. We have buildings that didn't spend all their funds. We have some departments, the Department of Instruction, and then teacher compensation carryover from when we implemented the teacher comp program, and we can talk about that. And then the new line item there is something that we talked about this spring and summer, which is monies that were unspent last year related to COVID that we're using this year to kind of meet PPE needs. New devices for students, we spent $500,000 on that, as well as just staffing for the ability to have extra people doing cleaning and those types of things, bus supervisors so that we can do social distancing. All that, those funds are being spent to help with that. So you can see that we anticipate potentially spending all that money. We'll see what happens as we go through the year. Again, lots of unknowns have happened so far. The one thing that you'll notice that from prior budgets that we presented, or the preliminary budget, was that we were going to have a transfer to the food service fund. You don't see that now. And I mentioned that at the beginning of my opening comments, that when the federal government decided to extend the summer food service program for the rest of the year, we automatically knew that we were in a better financial position for food service. We were able to basically, this last month in September, I think our revenues were $88,000. So even though, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit here to the food service fund, which is down below, even though I'm showing revenues equal expenses in this particular scenario, this budget, we now anticipate that we'll probably exceed our expenditures with revenue this year, and we probably might even be able to basically reestablish some fund balance for food service, which we're real excited about. So just briefly, the only transfer really that's happening is the normal transfer that we have every year, and that's between the Fund 10 budget and the Special Education Fund. That's totally normal. Every school district in the state has it. The Special Education Fund is not set up even to be able to fund itself with grants from the state and federal government. So we need to utilize funds to do that. It's more of a tracking mechanism for DPI to track what funds are spent for special needs students. So there is a $5.5 million transfer anticipated. We won't make that transfer until the end of the year when we actually know what we've spent. Going down, the Special Projects Fund, that's become kind of a catch-all from DPI's perspective. There's a lot of student activity funds that are in there, as well as any gifts that are given to us that extend into multiple years. And actually now a good portion of some of our scholarship funds are based in that area now, based on some GASB rulings that we've gotten. GASB stands for Governmental Accounting Standards Bureaus. They've given us some new guidance on that, and funds that were over in the 70 series are now in the 20 series, which is the Special Projects Funds. Already mentioned special education. You can see that there are some grants in there, but they don't self-fund the entire program. The non-referendum debt service fund basically pays for some WRS unfunded liabilities. It's related to a pension thing. It will actually be paid out over the next couple of years. We'll actually not have that need for that fund here in a couple of years, which we're looking forward to. We'll have some additional revenues that we'll be able to spend on in Fund 10 when that happens, because that is a revenue limited fund. Our next funds are our debt service fund. Debt service fund pays for those bonds that build Forest Edge and some of the other remodeling projects and additions that we've done over the last couple of years at the high school and middle school in Brooklyn, as well as Netherwood and Prairie View too. So those expenditures in that fund that you see now are actually fairly consistent over the next over the next decade or so, are going to be fairly consistent. We're at kind of a consistent about $6.3 million expenditure level each year. Not increasing, just level. Long-term capital improvement fund, we talked about this summer. We don't have much money in there, but we're establishing that. That's something that we'll be able to spend after 10 years as the fund's been established. We'll be able to use that as a new financing structure, but obviously not much money in there right now. And then you have the revenue bonds. Those are the funds that we're actually using to build Forest Edge, to buy Worth Woods, the Donaldson property, some of the other property that we purchased on MM for the environmental center. That's all coming out of that fund, and you see that there is a little bit left over at the end of this year. That's related to a fiber project that we're still anticipating doing next summer, but it's related to E-rate, and we have to wait to get into the cycle to do that. Then we talked a little bit about food service already, and you can see that right now we do not anticipate a transfer at all, which is great news. There are still, just a note, there are still people that are being charged to Fund 10 from the food service department. They are doing jobs like paraeducators in our schools. They're helping us clean between student uses, as well as being bus supervisors. So they are extremely useful, and we actually would hope that we'd have more people that could help us with that. So that they're really helping us out and helping to work on having students in the buildings. Next, we'll talk about our employee trust funds and our OPEB liability funds. These funds have two different purposes. The employee trust fund, as it says, is a trust fund. It's basically related to our sick leave payout when employees retire from us. There is the option that we have to put money into the trust fund for their health insurance purposes down the road. And that's something that we've established a long time ago. The other part of the Fund 70 area is OPEB. That stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. So it's also related to our employees that have retired from the school district. And that basically pays for that 4-year benefit at their year of retirement. There's still an employee has to contribute to that as well, but that helps to pay for that. There is a liability connected to that that we have to recognize in our audit. But over the last probably 14, 15 years now, I'm trying to remember when we established that, we have accrued a asset there, and we'll actually should anticipate going over $5 million in assets to compensate for that liability. So we anticipate only having around a $2.5 million liability at the end of this year. The pool fund, it's actually community education. We broke it down into 3 different components. The pool, community ed, which runs all our programming, and then the Performing Arts Center. And you can see what's going on there. We did reduce the budget a little bit, I think, from the prior years in order to keep the levy the same, simply because we knew that it was important to try to create some fiscal discipline in that fund if we could, because we knew that the other parts of the levy were going to be going up a little bit. So we tried to reduce areas where we could as much as possible in that area. And the Cooperative Purchases Fund is simply a fund that we utilize to help with the Badger Conference. We're the administrative fiscal agent for them, as well as Carl Perkins. We have an employee that has a certification that allows us to help other school districts in the state basically qualify for some federal dollars related to vocational training. And we run those grants through that fund for those districts as well as ourselves. So just going through real quickly, this is just general fund, and we talked a little bit about these assigned fund balances. These are just funds that were not spent from the prior year. I did add a different category in this area from the last one that we looked at, and that's the technology education incentive funds. Those are funds that the state is rewarding us for dual credit options that we all provide our students. And the different departments within the technology education area, the vocational education area, are basically looking to improve their program. That's what those funds are for. That's what the state was recognizing us for. So those have accrued in different components for that. And Greg Granberg manages that and works with those different departments to improve their areas. We'll continue on. Oh, I did want to mention, because I don't think we talked about it last time, and now I got to back up. The Common School Fund on the bottom there, we are given funds to improve our libraries each year. Because of COVID, we weren't able to, usually they're required to spend all the money related to those grants. We weren't able to spend all that money because of COVID last year, so the state did give us kind of a buy to be able to spend those money this summer, and that's what we did is we brought those over in a restricted area in the audit so that we could spend them this year. So just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about where the money comes from in the district. I've mentioned it a few times that 90% of our money is related to revenue, to student enrollment. And so you can kind of see this here. The 45%, I always tell people that we're kind of a dual income family, so to speak. We get our monies from both property taxes and state aid. Those happen to be the revenue sources related to the revenue limit that I've talked about, and is derived from the membership, the number of residents we have in the district. So if you add the 45% and then you add the state aid, which is the other side of the equation here, the 40%, you're at 85%. However, the 5% above the 40%, which is the per pupil aid, is that categorical that I mentioned before, that has grown a little bit over the last several years. And if you add that 5% to the 40, you're at 90. And so enrollment does drive 90% of our revenue each year. On the expenditure side, we are a very human resource focused organization. That's where the majority of our expenses are. You can see that salaries and benefits get you to about 67% in our district. If you were to compare other districts with us, you need to be cognizant of the purchase service component to it, because a lot of times districts will either have them in-house services or services that are contracted out. In our case, for instance, if you compared us to Middleton, Middleton has their own busing system. So there would have a higher percentage where we contract out and spend a couple $1 million on transportation. Middleton would have that internally, and so you'd see a difference in percentages there. So you can almost look at that 16% in Oregon and say a good portion of that is probably related to staffing, related to transportation, or for instance, evening cleaning, we do also contract out. That pretty much lines up with what I wanted to present as far as the budget this evening. This next slide is really related to the tax levy. So I guess I'll just open it up for questions, and any questions that you have related to the budget.
Thanks, Andy. And board members, and community, Andy puts together every year this packet, which is an amazing resource. It not only gives you the information regarding this year's budget, but also is a treasure trove of historical data and comparison in terms of numbers through the district. So I always keep a copy every year, and I've got a binder of these so I can go back and take a look. I'm going to walk through the board members now and see if they have any questions of Andy about the budget, starting with Krista and then Tim.
Thanks, Steve. I mean, this is what, the third or fourth time the board has seen the budget. So I think most of our questions are being asked, but I did want to revisit food service again in terms of the federal government. So can you go through that in terms of that change? Because we've seen that's really been the biggest variation in some of the budgets that we've seen. So just wondering if you can go through that one more time in terms of, we were expecting to spend more out of our budget, and then because the federal government decided to continue what they'd really started with the beginning of COVID, correct?
Yeah, well, it was in with like a month or two. Actually, it was in the summer that they implemented the summer program. So the first couple months of COVID, when that happened and we were shut down in March, we were doing a very small budget, or a very small food service program for people that that wanted to drive to school, basically, to pick up their lunches. That changed this summer, and they were able to basically start providing lunches to anybody. Everybody was eligible. We didn't have to show proof of free and reduced lunch or have to charge anybody or any of those types of things. And so when we started this year, this school year, our numbers were up significantly. We at first were told that it would extend through September, which was great. We were very appreciative of that. And then kind of a couple weeks into September, they said, well, we now think we're going to extend this through December 31st, 2020, as long as, and there was an asterisk on it, as long as we have money in the federal government to do it. So we were starting to plan, okay, we should have it through at least, a third of the year or so. And then the continuing resolution for the federal budget, which kind of happened last minute, had a clause in it to continue basically this summer school food service operation for all states until September 2021. And the reason that's important is we were only serving a couple hundred meals typically in the spring. And that's where we actually ended up spending in our food service budget more money than we were bringing in, significantly more money. We went through a couple $100,000 of fund balance in food service. But when we started doing this new program that the federal government allowed us to start this summer, we are actually closing in on 2,000 meals per day. So about 1,000 families a day, or students, if you would, a day, 2 meals, breakfast and lunch, and that has significantly helped our financial operation for food service. So that the staff that we have working in that department is they're bringing in more money than they're spending, and we continue to find ways to be more efficient in that as we've had time now by providing meals, the delivery option for 2 days a week, and all those, and then also working with daycare providers in the community, being creative that way, and then also allowing people to drive up and get meals as well. So being very aggressive, trying to find people that could participate in our program, and being very successful in that has really helped us.
Are we getting any additional funds from the federal government to help us through COVID, as you currently know?
Other than the food service program, we had the CARES Act money, which happened in the spring. That was only about $99,000 for us, which sounds like a lot of money, but we're not exactly sure the formula how that worked. There are districts that are smaller than us that got significantly more money, but the 99,000 went fairly quickly, and it had all kinds of restrictions on it. We abided by them, like paying your third-party contractors, basically their money that you would normally have to. There were all kinds of strings to it that we had to go through, but those are the only two revenue sources that I'm familiar with. We did get some masks from Wisconsin Emergency Management, which was probably some FEMA money, and then I heard out today that the census folks donated some masks to us as well. Other than that, that's about it.
Okay, thank you.
Tim, Anna, you're next.
Andy, I just want to pick back up on the food service question. The budget showed $567,000, and if I recall, some of the transfer that we did was showing about $800,000 of expense. Is the $567,000 the revenue we're expecting through the end of our fiscal year, or is that what we've received so far?
No, it would be. It would actually. Honestly, it'll probably be a little bit short of what we receive, because we're working up toward, on a full month basis, probably hitting toward $90,000 a year, so, or a month. I'm sorry. So if you added that for the remaining October, November, December is kind of a messy month, but and then the other 5 months of the year, you're probably closer to $800,000 to $900,000 that we'll have. We'll have some expenses to that. We just didn't update it right now because once we knew that there wasn't a transfer involved, we were kind of like, hey, we got it balanced. We'll probably update that at the end of the year, but our anticipation is that we'll see revenues exceed expenditures related to food service.
So the food service number that's in this budget of $567,000 is likely underestimated, under budgeted from a revenue perspective.
Yeah, it'll probably be a little bit under on the expenditure side too, but there definitely will be a revenue exceeding expenditure situation in that fund.
Okay. And does that have to stay if that excess, that profit, for lack of a better term, that has to stay in food service? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. The summer school FTE count. You kind of brushed through that a little too quickly for me.
Sure.
There was a reduction in FTE count for summer school. We didn't have summer school, really.
We had online. Yeah.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
We had online summer school.
Okay.
So if you actually look at the packet, it gets into that a little bit more detail in my presentation tonight.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, but it was a mere fraction of what it normally would be.
And so that 27 FTE, could you just speak to the significance of that?
So the major significance of it is related to, it works into our 3-year average for the revenue limit. So we're going to live with that lower number than we've had in the past.
I see.
For a couple of years. And there's the revenue side, and then there's the expenditure side, because we reallocated about $450,000 with expenses related to our summer school budget
Yeah.
for other purposes this year. And so that's probably my biggest worry is we'll have to figure out how we, because some of those things were related to ongoing expenditures and some of them are related to COVID related expenditures. So the COVID related expenditures by next summer, hopefully this is done and we can reduce those expenditures, obviously. But the ones that are ongoing will have to make up those revenues as we start the next budget. So there's my concern. I will also tell you that this is the impact of that 3-year averaging is not lost upon other school districts in the state. It impacts us a little bit more because we're a lot of districts take different philosophies with summer school. We are pretty aggressive with our offerings compared to a lot of other school districts, so it impacts us more. But we are lobbying through different organizations to have perhaps the legislature make a fix and maybe use our prior 3-year average, our 1920 3-year average for summer school purposes, and allow us to forecast that into the future. Nothing's to say that that will happen, but everybody realizes that this will have an impact, and that would be some relief related to it.
Okay. I have one last question. Can you go back to the school choice page,
But
the kids in, kids out page?
yep. Sorry, it's taking me a minute.
Oh, that's all right, no problem. So from this page, what I'm reading from this page is that we currently have about 360 kids opened enrolled to Oregon. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes.
And what I'm also reading is that from 1920 to 2021, that number increased by about 40 to 45. Is that
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And this kids out is showing at about 110 for 2021.
Yeah, I'd say right in there. Maybe, yep.
And is that 110 in addition to the little new Burmeister Woods out? So that's a total of something closer to 140 out?
Yep, you're right.
Okay. I just want to,
Yep.
I want to understand because I know we're typically used to getting kids in, more kids in, and we still are, without question. There are lots of people who are wanting to come into the Oregon School District. I'm just trying to understand the fact that we are just a -1 at the moment for third week in September. That -1 as a result of bringing an additional 40 kids in this year and seeing way more than that go out. Is that right?
I don't know about way more. I'd say it's comparable. It's not too far off. You need to add, the yellow, like you said before, add the yellow and the color next to it.
110 plus about 40.
Yep. So you see that those numbers did go up on us this year, but we also brought in more students. So maybe a little bit more out than in this year, but pretty close.
Okay.
From last
And
year.
again, this year isn't any different than any of the previous years. When we bring kids in, we are making a commitment to continue to serve them through graduation if that's what they choose. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe our board policy states that.
Okay.
State law,
Okay.
and Gina can correct me on this, but I believe state law allows you to have like a triggering amount or at a certain time when they move from one grade level to the other that they have to reapply. But I believe our district has chosen that once you're in, you stay in.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking those questions is I do see that development is continuing both in Oregon, in the Highlands of Netherwood, the neighborhood out by you and me, as well as the neighborhood across from Forest Edge. And I just want to make sure, having just built a new school, that we're going to have room for those kids, even though we've got additional kids open enrolling, which helps us this year. It's just that this year's help is going to carry for years because we're committing to those kids to hold them as long as they want to continue to enroll here. I just want to make sure our capacities are there when those kids come for what that school was planned for.
Yeah, I think that we looked at that as much as we could when we were allowing open enrollment this year, providing the recommendation. I think we stayed away from those buildings that are full. For instance, the middle school area and a couple other grade levels. But yes, your considerations, your thoughts in that regard are the same as ours.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you, Andy.
That
Anna, then Kevin.
This was a great presentation, Andy, and the packet of information was really helpful. And I agree with Steve that it really does a great job of outlining and highlighting all of this information. At this point in time, I don't have any questions. So thanks for the great presentation.
that
Good. Then Troy.
Yes, thanks, Andy, for the presentation. A lot of the questions I had were kind of answered. We have seen it a few times, as Krista mentioned, so it's certainly been a thorough process. I don't want to dive into a discussion, get us off topic, but at some point I'd love to understand if we've ever looked at, the two things that we're outsourcing in terms of cleaning and busing, if that's something we've looked at, business case for ever in-housing that, if you will. Don't want details, but just a yes or no, and maybe we can take it offline due to time.
Yeah, I think that is something that we could dive pretty deep into. So that'd be a great question to maybe explore offline. We've been, honestly, the transportation is just long-standing in our district. I think
Right.
we can go back to the 50s or something as far as the culture related to that. The cleaning component is something that we've done since I've been here, and there's definitely some things we could talk about with that.
Yeah, they both seem to be working well. It was just a curiosity from a budget perspective. That's all I have. Thank you.
Troy, and then Heather.
I don't have any questions. Nice job, Andy. Thank you.
Heather?
Andy, I just have two questions, and one, I'm sorry if you said this, but the open enrollment slide that we're on right now, that is the third Thursday one, or that is more up to date than the third Thursday count?
It's actually third Friday, and this is the third Friday. That's okay. That's all right.
Always wishing it was a Friday, I guess. Yep. Okay. Thank you. And then I think towards the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that, and forgive me if I mangle your words, but that you thought we would have funds to get through this year. And is that current state this year? Is that for as it's planned when we're able to go back into person? Can you talk a little bit about the budget outlook?
Yeah.
What you were saying there?
I think we have some resources that as we kind of work through the stages of more in person, I think, I mean, again, based on the plans that we've identified, I think we have the resources to be able to do that if we get to that point. So I can't promise that there's not, some type of thing that gets thrown at us, but the busing thing will be interesting because based on the plan, the tentative plan that we've kind of got out there related to bringing middle school and high school together, I think we're going to have buses driving around the village or driving around the school district almost constantly for a while. So there would probably be some additional costs. And that was one of the comments I made at the beginning, that right now we're kind of at budget. If we take the next step on the transportation side, we might be over budget. But we have some resources to be able to do with that now that we have, food service more kind of lined up and things. Things have changed where I'm feeling pretty comfortable.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. That was all that I had.
You bet.
I don't have any questions, Andy. Thank you for a great presentation and for putting the budget together this year under very unusual circumstances. If we don't have anything else from any other board members, looking at all of you, I'd entertain a motion to approve the 2020-2021 budget as presented this evening and as part of our preliminary budget that was approved by the district electors.
This is Troy. I'll recommend approval of the 2020-21 original budget as presented.
Is there a second to that motion?
Tim, I'll second.
Is there any discussion by the board? I see none. Take the roll, Katie.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Maring,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes, budget carries. Thanks, Andy. Second part of your presentation then is for the board to approve the levy, and you're gonna walk us through that quickly.
Very quickly, because this basically just feeds from the budget. So the tax levy that you have presented here is simply a slide that shows the last 2 years of audited components to the tax levy. Those are the fund, some of the funds that we mentioned before that have that levy component, both general fund, referendum debt service, which pays for the bonds, non-referendum, which pays for the unfunded liability, which will be going away in the near future, next couple years. And then the community service fund, which you see being maintained at the same level as last year. The last two columns are preliminary original. You see the percentage, the amount going down slightly. That's because of state aid, as well as a revenue limit being a little bit less than what we anticipated earlier in the year, simply because we did have a reduction in students rather than an increase in the third Friday count. So our 3-year average is up. We're getting a little bit more revenue limit, but not as much as we originally thought in the preliminary budget. And that's what makes up the difference and gets our, because of the increase in assessed value and those two other things I just mentioned, the levy rate goes down from projected 11.52 back a month or so ago to 11.19, which is a penny less than last year.
All right, any board member have any questions about the levy? Just put thumbs up and I'll call you because I think I see everybody rather than walk through. I don't see any questions from anybody, so I'd entertain a motion to approve the levy as presented this evening.
This is Troy. I'll move to approve the 2020 tax levy as presented.
Is there a second to that motion?
This is Anna. I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any comments? Anna, anything?
No.
Heather? Nothing? Okay, Krista, Troy, Kevin? Go ahead,
sorry.
Troy.
Yeah, I'll just comment. I mean, looking at the past few years of what we've accomplished, we've purchased property for multiple schools. We purchased property for an environmental education center. We built a nearly $40 million new school. We've increased our budget to operate that new school. And, we're looking at a decrease in our mill rate of a penny. And this is the 5th year in a row that we've had a decrease in the mill rate. So at a time when many of our families are having some financial challenges due to the pandemic, I'm just glad to see that our mill rate has decreased. But we have accomplished some pretty big things over the past 5 years. So
Great. Anyone else? Krista or Kevin? Okay. I'll just note that the increase in the levy, when you factor out the Forest Edge operating stuff, is right about 1.8%, which is tracking right about the inflationary rate. So that's right on point. So that's good. It would be, as I've said before, it'd be interesting to see, right on top of Troy's point is, the net new growth that we have, particularly arising out of Fitchburg, how that offset the increase, that 5% increase related to the operating expense. That would be an interesting figure to generate probably next year once all that property gets onto the tax roll. So I'd like to see that at some point. We also in the past did a comparison, I think when we were moving up to the referendum about what it would cost for a $200,000 house back then and now, and it was roughly the same, if not just, it was below cost of living. It would be interesting now that we've got both the capital referendum and the operating referendum online to see how that's held too. I would suspect it's going to be pretty stable given the net new growth on that.
Steve, I do have one point.
Okay, that's all I had. Go ahead, Krista.
Andy, and maybe you can speak to this. I think it's some of the things that are really, another thing that's really important in the budget is I know there's been discussion about, because the Oregon School District represents many different municipalities, sometimes what gets lost is the taxation of those municipalities. So I think it would be helpful if you just talk for 2 minutes in terms of Village of Oregon is really the largest percentage of our tax base, but can you speak to where Fitchburg is and Town of Oregon? I think that's very helpful for people to hear.
Oh boy, I'm trying to remember the percentages off the top of my head.
It's 46
Yeah.
for Village of Oregon. It's 16% for the city of Fitchburg and 16% for the Town of Oregon, and then it goes down from there. I just think it's really important that people understand that Fitchburg is really above the Town of Oregon in terms of taxation. And so when we talk about all of us are part of the Oregon School District, Fitchburg residents pay a significant percentage to our Oregon School District, and I think that's a really important point.
And as I recall, Fitchburg actually increased its percentage by about 2% this year, simply because of the growth. 2% as a whole, it grabbed up more than, you're right, it is growing significantly faster. And as I mentioned earlier, I remember the dollar amount in Fitchburg was a larger increase than the Village of Oregon's dollar amount, even though the Village of Oregon is close to half of our assessed value.
Right. So if you live in the Town of Oregon, really, Fitchburg is contributing more than the Town of Oregon at this point in time, or close to. And that's just it's a really big difference that we've seen in the district over the last 5 to 10 years.
Well, that's as we had projected when we proposed the referendum, is that those costs at some point would be paid for by that growth in Fitchburg out there. So, all right, we have a motion and a second on the table, I believe, right, Katie?
Correct.
Would you call the roll? And the motion is to approve the tax levy as presented.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Ms. Garrison,
Yes.
Mr. Maring,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes, motion carries. We have a tax levy and you guys can notify the various municipalities of our number. Thanks
you.
so much, Andy. And Andy, thanks your team that have helped put that together for you.
You bet.
You do a
Cara
great
Newton Cara is an extremely talented person, and I rely on her a lot. So she
Right.
was behind me in all this. I appreciate that.
Right, and we don't get to see her. You get to be the pretty face on the screen. So thank Cara for us and getting all that work done.
You bet.
All right, takes us out of the action items into discussion items. Committee reports, policy. Anna, anything to report?
The only thing I have to report, we do have a meeting scheduled for next Monday night, November 2nd, from 6 to 7:30 p.m. I have not been briefed by Gina to know what could potentially be on that agenda. So I don't know, if Gina, if you want to give us a preview or let us know what might be on there.
Sure. So we have our student services has put together some guidelines for working with our students that are transitioning or have gender nonconformity. So we're really excited to share that with you.
Great. So I think that might be the topic, but other than that, no other items to report.
Troy, visioning.
Nothing to report. We have not met since the last meeting.
All right, that takes us to informational items, which is one, opening of school. It's a regular update on where we're at. And Dr. Bergstrom, floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me just pull this up for you. Okay.
And the intent then is Leslie's going to go through this, and then after she's completed, we'll go through and see if anybody has any questions of Leslie. We'll go in reverse order that we did before.
Thank you. As was mentioned very early on in the meeting, I think maybe even in a conversation online before we started, end of Q1 is right around the corner. And I don't think any of us, even back in July when we were doing our planning, envisioned that this is where we would be at the end of Q1 with all of the challenges, the struggles, the frustrations that have been felt across the board, no matter how you feel about schools being open for in-person learning. So it definitely isn't where we want to be, but I would like to give you an update right now on some of the items that are critical for all of us. So, oh, sorry, I went through that a little fast. Related to the update tonight, you will be hearing some information on our support structures, the way we are making decisions, the information that we're utilizing, and potential timing regarding those decisions, the current status of our phased restart, and then action steps that we will be taking as far as next steps in our reopening process. So as you know, our goal is to have all of our kids back in school according to the plan that we have set forth. So I want to talk very specifically about the support services and the support hubs. And the reason I want to spend some time on this is because, as many people mentioned in letters this evening, and certainly in considerable number of conversations over the course of time, that there are a lot of supports that are necessary to ensure our students are doing as well as they possibly can in this unusual environment. And some of that has to do with wellness checks on kids, as well as providing counseling services. And the counseling is virtual as well as in person. Also, we know that our students are receiving special education services in person if it's deemed appropriate by their IEP team. We definitely have supports related to internet service, and that has very much been in partnership with Friends of Oregon School District, because they have provided us resources to ensure that our families who need support can get it. They're also instrumental in the mentoring and tutoring supports that are out there right now. And we're definitely utilizing our buildings for the mentoring that's happening, and I'll talk more about that later. We also have the high school has in-person labs happening in the technology department. Experiences that are difficult to replicate in the virtual world. Students are being offered voluntary opportunities to come in and complete the labs in person. The small number allows us to ensure that we are doing everything possible to make sure that the 6 feet of social distancing, as well as the masking policy, is well adhered to, so that our students remain safe. And food service, as Andy mentioned, this is a huge level of our component of our support when we're talking about 1,000 meals for lunch and 1,000 meals for breakfast on a daily basis. Now, support hubs in particular, we spoke about this last time. I want to make sure that you knew that we are beginning this process. Students are being invited into the support hubs based on internet needs. A lot of times, even when we are able to provide hotspots, some of our students live in areas that it's just really difficult to get any connection. Some students need a quiet environment, and schools can provide that for them. Some students are in the schools right now to receive mental health services, just the supports that are really important to staying healthy in all aspects of health. Some students are in the support hubs based on engagement, that they need more direct support to be successful, as well as some direct teaching of online learning strategies. So as you can see, the middle school, the high school, and RCI are offering their support hubs 4 days a week. They have AM and PM cohorts. As I mentioned, the principals have systems in place to ensure we're identifying students in the services. They connect with families when that is the case. And Forest Edge is starting in November, 2 days a week, because their cohort is much smaller. And I, once again, wanted to mention that in addition, the in-person learning services are really serving our students who are being mentored quite well. So those of us who are serving as mentors have an opportunity to meet our students in person, as long as we're following all the right safety protocols. So then I'm going to go through a little bit of what exactly, or what are some of the most frequently asked questions. Whether it is some of the really thoughtful emails that we receive from families asking really excellent questions that I've in fact sent on to public health, and I'll get to some of that in a moment. Or things when people call or other interactions, there are some really frequently asked questions. And one of them is, well, how does Dane County compare to the rest of the state? And for that information, and many of you are already very familiar with this resource, we would go to the DHS activity tracker, because it is through the activity tracker that's updated on a very consistent basis that you're able to see what the burden rate is by county. And they're tracking really the case activity, and the case activity is a combination of the burden rate and the trajectory. So what you can see here is Dane County, and Dane County, similar to most other counties in Wisconsin, with the exception of 4, as you see on the screen, are in the highest category related to case activity. So this is one of the pieces that is referenced through public health, and it's something that many of you are familiar with because it's so accessible to everybody. The next frequently asked question that I hear is, what is the impact of UW-Madison? Well, in early September, if you remember right, you can see on this chart by 9/17, there was a really high 14-day average in cases coming from the UW. And so when you looked at Dane County overall, the UW had a significant impact on our 14-day average. However, as you can also see by the chart, the UW cases have declined, and they are not making up a significant component of our Dane County numbers. As a matter of fact, right now, they're only 9% of total cases. So while the UW numbers have declined, the rest of the county has increased. And that gets to another question that people ask frequently, and I think it's a really excellent question. And that is, well, how do the cases in Madison compare to the suburbs? Because, you know, we aren't Madison, we are different. So what is the comparison? Well, the first time, I think this is the first time the blog that comes from public health has indicated that cases outside of Madison actually made up more than the majority of the cases in Dane County. Outside of Madison now has 58% of Dane County cases. And so on the left side, you will see, actually the opposite side, you will see the list of cities, towns, and villages and total cases. And those were October 1st through October 16th. And it tells us a little bit of the breakdown. What I think is important for those of us in the Oregon School District to consider is that we would be counted a few times, right? Because we have some of our families in Fitchburg, then of course we have Oregon, and then we have municipalities that are included in the all others. So I think it's important to know that suburbs are getting hit right now too, unfortunately. But another really critical question, and I think this was referred to in multiple emails tonight, so I think it's important to address, and that is, where do these metrics come from and how do they compare to others, meaning the public health metrics? So a lot of you have already heard, I don't need to go over the thresholds for K2, 3.5, and 6.12 because you're very familiar with that. And I'm sure that many of you are also staying on top of the 14-day average, which is calculated every day because it's a rolling average, but it's posted on Thursdays around 5 o'clock. And our rolling average that was posted last Thursday was 167 cases for a 14-day average. So what does that mean? Because oftentimes people say that public health is setting metrics that are almost impossible to meet. And I completely understand that. And as a matter of fact, that's the question that I took to public health myself, you know, stating where exactly did the 19 come from, and how does it compare with Harvard and the CDC and the Minnesota Stay Safe plan? Because those are all plans that, or Minnesota and Harvard definitely fed into public health. The CDC 2.0, that came out slightly after public health, but you'll be able to see that it aligns really well. So what public health then did for me is they calculated out the thresholds for all of these plans according to Dane County population, because you can't just look at the metrics, you have to make a calculation so that it is reflective of the number of people in Dane County. So when they did that, it's still not quite, it's not easily comparable, and it's difficult to do because all three entities calculate somewhat differently. And Harvard only has 4 categories, whereas Minnesota and the CDC have 5. So things aren't exactly perfect in the analysis, but when you do the mathematical calculations, you can get a pretty good idea. So the green boxes are showing us where the 167 14-day average falls. So for Minnesota, we are in the high category. For Harvard, we're far above their highest category, which actually is red if you look at the colors, but it wouldn't be because we're making comparisons to other models. And for the CDC, you can see that we're quite far above. So I think the really critical piece to think about, oh, and by the way, for those of you who are interested, after Public Health sent me their calculations, I consulted with one of our esteemed high school math teachers just to make sure all the calculations were accurate and that I was indeed presenting something that was correct, and everything aligned quite well. One of the really critical pieces to note in all of this, first of all, it shows us that we are in alignment with these other plans that have been put out there. And you could even see where some of the thresholds fall. For example, in Harvard, the 612 and the 3.5 and even the K2 threshold that was set fall in the medium range. For the CDC, the 612 falls in the medium high range, and the 3.5 and the K2 fall in the high. So, and you can see where we fall in Minnesota too, which is lower risk for the 612 and then medium risk for the 3.5 and K2. So this particular graphic allows us to see quite a bit. But what all 3 metrics have in common is that where we currently are as a county leads them to either recommend a hybrid at elementary and online for secondary, or movement of all to online. So they're very consistent actually in where they would recommend we are as far as the metrics in Dane County. Now, here's what's really another really critical point. It is absolutely no one's expectation that we would not move our kids into in-person learning until we were free of COVID. We don't know when we'd be free of COVID. What we're really looking for is just numbers to be low enough so that there is a reduced risk. And here's a great example. A lot of people have sent me some information regarding an interview Dr. Joseph Allen does. He's one of the researchers who developed the original set of metrics from Harvard. And in it, he says some things that I think we can all agree with, very much so, that schools are open, it's a national emergency to open our schools. And he lists all the reasons why that many of us have discussed in conversations along the way. But one of the things that he also mentions in the article is that you can open your schools when community transmission is low. And when you look at what's on here, you can see right now our community transmission is not low. Now, the reason I'm sharing it is because a lot of people have asked about the origins of public health metrics and how they compare to some of the other standards that are out around the country. So I wanted to give you a chance to look at that. Now, given all of this, then another question that's currently brought up is, well, if you're following public health, then why in the world is K2 in person right now? Which is another great question. So here's the exact quote that comes from the public health website. But what it comes down to is that once we met the threshold for opening K2, which was back in August, once that threshold was met, then they began to monitor the connection between the K2 in-person learning and clusters or outbreaks that they were seeing. And what they are not seeing is a strong connection right now to in-person school environments. In most of the in-person environments throughout Dane County are just K2. We spoke about that a bit at the last meeting. They're not seeing a strong connection between that and having K2s open. So even though our case numbers are going in a very bad direction, they do not recommend, or they're supportive of allowing K2 to remain in person. So I think that is a good sign for those of us who worry that public health is being very stagnant or very black and white in their decision making. So connected to that, who exactly is on the Public Health of Madison-Dane County Board? I think that has been, they're influencing our lives, this particular organization. So understanding who's involved is important. Now, this is their board. They also have, many of the executive team and many people employed. But you can see that the board is composed primarily of medical professionals with a variety of specialties, including psychiatry. So here's something that's very important to people, and that is, as new information is coming out related to transmissibility, and science is evolving, because remember, when we started this, we knew very little about it, and as time goes on, we know more and more about COVID-19. So as things are evolving, will public health evolve in their guidelines also? And this is a quote that comes from them very directly. And the answer is yes. They are continuously reviewing their recommendations, which are about 8 weeks old or so. And they're assessing them in combination with the other things they are seeing in addition to research science. So know that they are not stagnant, or they are saying that they are not stagnant. And as new information comes out, they will make adjustments. So that leads us to, well, where are we exactly? Because we know that we're leaning into the thresholds that were established by public health to make our decisions. So what does that look as far as a timeline? Well, this is a graphic that's currently on our website, and I'll show you a little more from our website in the next slide. But for our phased restart, you see that there have been points in time already that have increased the amount of students who are actually in-person learning. And we have 3 phases to go before we are a full implementation of a hybrid model. So for Oregon Online, you can see on the bottom that our families who selected that at the beginning of the semester, that they are committed to at least the first semester for being in the online option. And we'll be talking more about second semester as that time approaches. So this is an example. This is from our dashboard, which we just put up the second week of the dashboard on Friday. We will update our Friday morning. And I know that some families would like us to bring back the letters, because originally we sent a letter to the school and to the whole district. And if it was pertinent to a classroom, we sent them a separate letter too. So we have now decided to not send out letters to the entire district, but to the schools and to the classrooms to notify them when there is a positive case in the school. However, for those of you who really want to continue to stay in the know regarding the whole picture, we have 2 things for you. First is the dashboard, which you'll notice here. And then the next thing is that every letter that we send home to schools is on our website under family communication. So you can see down at the bottom, if you click on the green tag on the Oregon web homepage, you'll then be able to get into multiple sources of information related to COVID, and in particular, any communications that we send out. So if you are a family from Forest Edge and there was a positive case in Netherwood, keep track of all that's happening, we'll be able to access all of that information on that site. So you can see here that yes, indeed, it does have an impact on us, the level of the virus within the community. So right now we're at no staff who are at school, or as of Friday. Actually, I think we would have more to update past Friday. And positive cases for students at school, because we do not know if there are positive cases in the high school or the middle school. We aren't necessarily contacted by public health in those cases. So what you see here is just students who are physically in school. And certainly we don't necessarily know who might have cases in Oregon. And then the number of staff who are in quarantine, students who are in quarantine. So you'll be able to access that information updated every Friday. So now I want to get into what exactly are our action steps, because this is a pretty important piece. What are we going to do? Well, as of starting the week of November 2nd, we'll have 2 new surveys, one to students and one to staff. We really want to hear from our students regarding their experience. We want to hear from their voices in discussing how their learning experience is impacting them. And we got to hear a couple of great examples and letters tonight. For staff, we only want the staff's perception of the student experience, as well as what more we can do to be supportive of them as they're doing this very difficult work. We'll also at the next board meeting be sharing the results of the family survey that went out. So in a preliminary manner, I can tell you that we had just under 2,500 responses, and the responses are per student, because as a family member or caregiver, you fill out the survey to each of your children. And that purpose of the survey was really to learn from the perspective of the parents how things have changed since the spring. We feel we've improved sadly. The parents don't see that improvement, or the students don't when we ask them, then clearly we have a big problem. And then relationship building. We wanted to find out, do the adults at home see their students building relationships with staff members at school? To know how important that is. And then we'll give you the full results, all of the long answers. We have a qualitative software, a qualitative data software analysis piece that will help us pull out themes or that you wrote, and we very much appreciate you taking the time to do it, because we really do need to hear what people are thinking. And that's why I much appreciate the people who fill out the survey and the people who take the time to write into the school board. And we will have an additional check on student well-being, similar to what we did in early September. So please expect that too, because we want to be able to reach out to you so that you know to come to us when you need something. And we want to make sure that path of communication is open, particularly related to the students and their social emotional well-being. Now we'll talk about actions, our next steps a little bit with winter sports. So we know that now there is a role for Mr. Carr in the sense that he is advocating for our athletes. He represented the Badger Conference athletic directors, and another person represented the Big 8 athletic directors, and the 2 of them went and met with public health in order to better understand what is possible and what could be possible. So they're playing leadership roles in that way, and they have also arranged for a meeting with all of the athletic directors and public health representatives to continue to maintain clarity and consistency. For winter sports, it's very important that if families of students in grades 7 through 12 would like to participate in winter sports, that you complete the registration process. Because once you are registered as a participant in the sport, that's when you'll start getting communication from coaches, and when we can start more planning related to logistics. Because we know that in order to have our small group practices, we really have spread people out in our gym spaces, and we can't begin that planning until we know how many of you would like to be involved. So please remember to register. That's an important part of the planning. And then we are holding small group practices for winter sports. The season itself is not canceled, and we're sorry that some people took that away from the letter. I really feel badly about that, but we want to move forward with practices and getting ready for competitions. We are able to examine all the options for how that can happen. So we are committed to starting sports at the same schedule, the same time that we would have started them in any other year. So that's right around mid-November. And by later next week, if you have registered for the sports, you will be hearing from your coaches regarding information about practices and how that's all playing out. And as it says on here, we will continue to examine all options for play. Everyone understands how important this is to kids. Not just to be in person for their academics, we know that that's critical, but also the opportunity to play a game to participate in a sport that either have always wanted to try and this is the first time, or something that they've been doing for as long as they can remember. And they want to do it with their friends and the people that they've grown up with. So in addition to that, we've mentioned before, but I'll say again that virtually all of our other co-curriculars are running as scheduled, unless it's something that centers on service projects, because to get kids together for some service projects, clearly some we can do without being in person, but to get large groups together, we need to delay that. But that really makes it about 98% of our co-curricular are running. So that brings me really to the next action step that I would like to take as an administrator. I definitely listened to the board discussion at the last meeting and heard that there is an interest in establishing a medical review team. Now you can see what we have on here is absolutely a draft, because in communication with board president, we have hoping that our board members, Ms. Megan and Mr. LeBrun, and I believe they have said yes to this, would be willing to lead this committee with me. And I would be working together to really clarify or cement the purpose of the group. You can draft that's in orange, as well as invite potential members. So that is something that the three of us will be working on in the next couple of weeks, because we would like to present a more solid plan by the next board meeting, where the purpose for the group that we will be leading is clear, as well as potentially members are willing to help us. So I'm excited about that next step, because I think that there is a lot that can be learned in partnership with some medical experts who can add additional information, and information that is additional to all that I am receiving from the sources that I've mentioned previously today. So in closing, I wanted to make sure that it was very clear that there are considerable and growing options for student support, that we are identifying our students who are most in need, and working through ways to bring them into the building to support them in multiple different levels. I hope that you have a little more information regarding the thresholds that are used for decision-making, where they come from, and how to measure up compared to others that are used around the country. And also that we are taking specific action steps, collecting information from families, moving forward with as many experiences as possible that we know are critical to our kids. So with that, I think it's time for me to take some questions.
Heather, and then Troy, you're next. Any questions for Leslie?
I do have a few questions. Leslie, thank you so much. That is super helpful and some great information and just good to know all of that. So appreciate your presentation. My first question is back on the slide of the numbers of staff and students quarantining. Can you help me understand just, these are the students and staff in the building. Can you help me understand how many staff and how many students are currently going into our building, so I can better understand how 21 and 34 are in the community as a percentage?
Sure. I'm trying to think. 726 students, I believe, are currently engaged in the K2 scenario. So you can see that 34 is out of that.
Yep.
And staff, gosh, I don't know, Gina, if you can remember how many we have per building that are actually in, because it's not just the people, it's not just the teachers who are teaching K2 who are in the buildings, because they certainly are, but there's a lot of other people who come into the buildings to teach from their classroom. So it's difficult to say necessarily how many people are in each building on a given day.
Sure. Could we simplify and go with just the teachers who are teaching for a better understanding?
It would be probably right around 30. And then that is just me estimating right now, considering like three classrooms per grade level at three.
Right. But there's also other staff in there like that are
Quite a few, yes.
that are interacting with students or no? I guess I'm just trying to see, like, in terms of, is that 21 number high, or is that a strain on substitute teachers? I'm just trying to understand the number. If you don't have it off the top of your head, we can connect
No,
up.
no, I mean, we can definitely talk about how it impacts us in lots of ways. Because if a staff member is in quarantine, but they're feeling well, then oftentimes they can still teach remotely. And so if it's a teacher of a K2 student, what we need to do then is the teacher can teach remotely, but we need to find another adult who will be physically with the students in the classroom.
Gotcha.
So there is that kind of challenge.
Okay.
There, it's sometimes when people aren't feeling well and they need to be out, and we need to find staff members to take over virtual sessions or sometimes in-person sessions. So there is a strain on the substitute pool. We're working through it. I don't find anything to be something that we can't accomplish, but it's a challenge, sure.
Okay. The other question that I had was, when you were summarizing the Minnesota and Harvard and Dane County Public Health piece, I think you mentioned, and I just want to go back to it, that if we were following the Minnesota and Harvard, that elementary students would be eligible to go back with our current numbers. Is that, or did I mishear that?
I think Minnesota had elementary as a hybrid and high school as distance. For Harvard, our 167 14-day average puts us in the highest category where there'd be no recommendation for in-person schooling.
Gotcha. So, and I'm not necessarily advocating, I'm more just out of curiosity. What does Dane County Public Health say, or if this question hasn't been asked, I'd like to know, like, how is Dane County Public Health differentiating between second grade and third grade, or second grade and fourth grade, right? I'm with you on kind of the 6 through 12, but I have a hard time, I have a harder time with the grade 2 or grade 3, for example.
Like why is there a split between 2 and 3 as opposed to 3 and 4 or whatever that happens?
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of pieces, and I can certainly ask the question super directly because they're excellent about answering the question. What I've done thus far is that the K2 grades, it's three grades. So they're considered through science to have less risk of severity for transmission. And 3 grades was enough to begin phased in approach. So let's phase in a few grades, watch data, and then phase the next few grades. So that's why they have different thresholds for those different pieces, is that they made determinations that are based on the idea of phasing in a few grades at a time.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I don't think there's anything magic.
I guess. Yeah, it's just I would be curious of their direct, and they're now in our numbers aren't follow. Again, this is just for like third grade, for example, or fourth grade. Our numbers aren't following their original K through 2. So, I guess I'm just curious more why now, like, for example, a grade 3 couldn't return as we continue to phase in. Maybe it's 1 grade at a time or 2 grades at a time, right? I'm certainly not advocating for the entire school, but I just have a harder time with the grades.
We've definitely pushed a little bit on 3 and 4. So we're pushing in on that question too.
Okay, and then my last question is just on the hubs. Can you speak to just the usage, and is there additional demand capacity, or is there additional capacity to welcome students who are struggling with one of the various types of ways that you talked about?
Well, there's definitely additional capacity because we're starting slow and adding students over time. Okay. So absolutely, there's more capacity.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Troy and then Kevin.
Great. Well, I actually had the same question Heather had, that last question about the hubs. And I guess just as a follow-up, do you feel that we need to do more communication to help families understand that those hubs and labs are an option. I mean, based on some of the letters we've been receiving, I'm not sure that that message is out there.
Mm-hmm. And it's probably because we've started with smaller numbers that will grow over time. So we always want our families to reach out to the counselors, the principals, the teachers when students are struggling. But right now, our principals are working through a protocol that will start with either the students who are most disengaged or the students who don't have regular access to the internet. So they're working through a protocol at the time, but there's absolutely no reason why families who really believe this to be an important thing for their children can't reach out.
Okay, great. And just I guess a couple of comments. The slide that you have up on the screen right now, for putting that together, because I think that's really, really helpful for the community. We've gotten a few emails that I think we're misinterpreting some of the metrics, specifically the Minnesota metrics were being misinterpreted by a factor of 14 and kind of looking at that as a per day versus a 14-day cumulative number. So I think this is a really helpful slide for the community. Thanks for presenting that tonight. And then I guess my next comment is just something that's really been on my mind, and it's related to students getting more physical activity as we're approaching winter and the colder weather. And I'm interested in seeing some more ways that we can get students together. Perhaps using some of our beautiful facilities to get some physical activity in small groups that comply with the health metrics. And I guess I'm feeling like there's some urgency to that. I just see it in my own family that there's a lack of physical activity, and that we all know physical activity has a positive impact on mental health. So, and I guess I would just encourage that. And we know that we have volunteers out there who are willing and ready to help us out with supervision on those things.
And so, Troy, you mean in addition to sports, like opportunities that are above and beyond what's offered for sports? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. Not all children want to play with a ball. So if there's other things that can be done to encourage physical activity, indoors, outdoors, whatever it may be. And then, lastly, I guess I just wanted to mention, the daily average in Dane County, it's 40% of caseload. It's 40% higher than at our meeting. And, I'm even more conflicted today than I was back then. In one of the emails, someone had mentioned the Great Barrington Declaration, and I had an opportunity to read that. And then I went and read the John Snow Memorandum, which is the complete opposite statement. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm pretty happy to hear that we're going to form this medical review committee to sort through all of these differing medical opinions that are out there, and how those medical opinions relate to Oregon. And that's all that I had. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Kevin, and then Anna, you're up.
So Troy, what you just mentioned was really interesting too. I mean, I also want to applaud us that we're taking the step on this medical advisory board, listening to the experts in the community for sure, and getting multiple perspectives on the disparity of information we're getting. I mean, you just pointed out two kind of polar opposite views, and of course this is a heated topic, and there's a lot of views in the community. There's a lot of views with experts, and the experts in a lot of cases are not agreeing. I mean, we know that school is being done right outside the county borders, and it's being done rather successfully. Will that change with continuing increase in rates? I guess we'll wait and see. But in much of the country, kids are back in some form. So, my position's been clear. It remains clear that we need to get kids back in school in some form or the other, and give the community some hope and be as transparent with them as possible. I want to ask you one question to start with, Leslie. I don't know which slide it is. I have a note here about the new survey. It said understand the experience. The two new surveys are going to go out, probably one to the students, one to the teachers about understanding the experience. So I'm not making any assumptions. That's solely about how they're enjoying or not enjoying virtual learning, right?
Well, our focus is virtual learning, but we're also trying to craft some questions specific to this for the students regarding just their feelings in general. So this morning, part of our discussion was looking at the Dane County Youth Survey and trying to perhaps craft some questions based on those, because then there might be some comparable information from previous years.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a good step. Do we have plans to send out a survey to parents and ask them for their preference on returning to school or not? And I understand this is not a popularity contest, but what I think is important for planning purposes is to not make assumptions about who we think would go back if the option was available and when the option is available, because there'd be planning that needs to be done in terms of the school building. Do we have enough rooms to be socially distanced? We know that's been a challenge. Do we have enough teachers, et cetera, et cetera? So my recommendation and ask at some point is that we do such a survey, and that we're not, of course, we're getting lots of letters on a regular basis, and those are being read and considered and reviewed, but there's a wide swath of our community that's not saying anything, but we know they have an opinion. And I think it's important we get their opinion, because they've elected us to listen to them and to respond to, their beliefs, and they're taxpayers, and we're here to represent them. So I think it's an important step at some point soon that we get such input. And I think honestly, the same thing should be done to the teachers, that how they feel in an anonymous survey, and that the consolidated results in both cases, in both new surveys, is communicated to the community. So we're being as transparent as possible through all this.
Thank you.
Last question is about competition. I know there's a lot of focus on sports. Sports is near and dear to a lot of people, but I'd also like to kind of understand, and I know there's some examples with math and some math club and other things, but what is being done with non-sport activities like band, theater? Is there other, I want to make sure that, we're obviously, the whole child is important, and I look at extracurriculars, what's learned on the field. If you're blowing a horn or you're playing the football game, these are things that kids learn, right? So it's just a different classroom, if you will.
Absolutely. Yes. So we are continuing with our music education classes, and they have to look different, especially for students who are starting a brand new instrument, grade 5, when they haven't played a band instrument before. Learning it without being in person is particularly challenging, but our teachers are definitely rising to the occasion, and our students are performing virtually and solo and ensemble competitions, etc. I know the play that they're practicing is one that's being done virtually. So our students continue to have opportunities to express themselves in the arts, and that's a big thank goodness, right? That they get that opportunity, even though the scenario is challenging.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And kind of building on what Troy was saying too, just, the connection between physical activity and mental health, as we all know, very critical. And if there's something that can be done, like you said, with the great facilities, the walking track, et cetera, is there a way we could get kids to socially distance, but be, get active somehow? I really am concerned with the winter months coming up, and the challenges we have with mental health are only going to get exacerbated. So that's very concerning me. And again, we all know that some activity would certainly help. So we should be thinking about that. I guess one last is a very specific question, being on the basketball board as well. I've seen the plan submitted, which I think was very well thought out and very thoughtful by both of our coaches and the basketball board. My main question is this: I know the season's not canceled, but is there any plans for competition, or is that a next step decision-making process?
That's definitely a next step. That's part of what's being discussed when the athletic directors are meeting with public health.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have.
Thanks, Kevin. Anna and then Tim.
A lot of great questions coming from fellow board members. Appreciate a lot of those clarifying questions. I have a couple of questions of my own. I guess the last meeting we had, we learned about the hybrid flipped model that our district will be looking at as we return to a hybrid and more in-person model for our older ages. I guess my question would be, I'm assuming that planning is still underway, given that that's probably going to be a big undertaking. So I guess I just want to make sure that all of the necessary steps are being taken to, with the hopes that we are moving eventually to that opportunity. So just, can you talk a little bit about what things are happening still behind the scenes to get us in position for that?
You bet. Our principals are very proactive planners. So we're in a lot of communication regarding steps. For instance, at the RCI and Forest Edge level, our grade 6 parents haven't yet filled out a form regarding AM or PM preference, or whether or not they want transportation. So they're working on that particular piece. The middle school and the high school are working on, well, actually, Mr. Planner and I spoke today that he's working on how to change schedules and adjust things to ensure that there would be the coverage that's necessary for the flipped hybrid model. And that's part of not only his decision-making process, but he's working in partnership with his leadership team on all of those pieces.
Great, thank you. I have a couple of other comments related to the proposal put forth to develop the health review committee. I do support that initiative from the standpoint of not only having a group who can routinely evaluate and look at data and provide input to the board of the administrative team, but also to provide a communication channel as well to families just in our district, because I think that's such an important piece. What you've presented tonight was so helpful, and it really does take a lot of the information that we're hearing and presents it in a way that is showing that we're aware of these things, we're looking into these things, and we're taking them into consideration. And so I just think that that's really important for our families to be informed of. And so I think another key role of that group is going to be a communication piece. So I hope that that's also part of that charge, is to help with that communication. But I think that's a great idea, and I would support that for this pandemic. The last comment I'll make, I'm really pleased to hear that we're bringing kids in for the tech classes, the hands-on learning in those small groups. That is such a wonderful report. That is awesome to hear, because that is a lot of the students who want to learn with their hands. That's so critical, and I'm just so pleased to know that we've offered that opportunity. So that's awesome. Also really excited to know that the support hubs are up and running, and we're going to have kids there. Hopefully, as now it sounds like, if they were starting early October. So that's wonderful. And I would agree with some of the other comments on, if there's capacity there, that we would continue to reach out, or sometimes there may be kids that are struggling that we don't know about, that they're putting on a good face, but behind that face they're struggling, and we may not know it. I don't know how we find that out, but I guess I would just really strongly support adding capacity to that as much as we can, and making that available to as many students as we can who are asking for it and or demonstrating that they need it through invitation. Those are my comments. Thank you for the great presentation, Leslie.
Thank you.
Tim, and then Krista.
Thanks, Steve. Just picking up from where Anna left off with regards to those hands-on activities, those hands-on classes. I'm just down the road from the school construction project. And I see that team of people out working even through really crappy weather. And I have got to believe those are some of the happiest students we have in the district. Even in the rain this past week, they were out there putting siding up. And I think that's a great example of engaging students in physical activity and education in an in-person setting can really impact what they can get done and what they can learn. The other thing that I wanted to pick up on was this whole issue around hubs. I think we're doing a great job offering and finding what capacities we have for those hubs. If we could think of our facilities, our activity facilities as one of those hubs, I think it could really help kids and families out as well to understand what our capacities are in those gyms. Oh, and I'm talking outside of scheduled practices. I'm talking about just simply activity spaces where they can get physical activity and not necessarily, to Troy's point, with a ball. I think we have some great facilities out there that I think are going unused right now. And if we can consider those activity hubs, which is part of the education process, I think we can all agree on that. I think it would be very helpful. And I think it could lend ourselves to getting that sports group more satisfied as well. With regards to that, Leslie, you mentioned that the importance of registering for your sport. You said it's an important part of the planning process. So to get registered, so we know what our facility needs are, so we know what our adult needs are, and so we know what participation numbers we can expect. I hope we're thinking about traditional education in the exact same way. I know Kevin mentioned, getting a survey out to see where families land today with regards to in-person versus virtual. And that could be anonymous. We don't need it to be anonymous. We need to understand very specifically what grades, what kids, and what teachers are available and have an interest in getting in-person learning when the time is right, so that we can do our planning. And so I'm hoping that although we may not need that kind of survey by Friday, I think continually gauging where our community is in terms of need and in terms of numbers is important, because I think it gives us a trend line. And it's going to help us in planning so that we don't find out right at the last minute when everybody is excited about getting back to school that we have too much supply and not enough, too much supply of educators and not enough people who want to be educated in person, for instance. I don't think that's going to happen, but we don't know. And until we have more than just anonymous information, we don't know what we're working with. We edged in on that in the July survey. I don't think the survey that went out to families last night touched on that at all, or last week touched on that at all, and I think it needs to. Let me see if I have, with regards to the meetings that the superintendents are having with Dane County Health. We all know that there are a number of districts in Dane County who are have been more, I don't want to say more active. They have unique things going on in their district. Middleton, Waunakee are two very good examples of that. Waunakee has a medical board, an advisory board. What is coming to those meetings with the superintendents in Dane County Health that is being affected by that medical advisory board? How is that information coming to that meeting with Dane County Health, and how is it being received?
Actually, okay, I'm thinking Middleton does not have, sorry.
Middleton does not. Wanakee does, yes.
Wanakee is the only one that I'm aware that has a medical advisory board. All other districts have one medical advisor.
Mhm.
Wanakee has not necessarily presented to us on what is discussed at their board meetings. However, I've gone on their website and I have looked at their board agendas and watched some of their board meetings to have a better understanding of it myself. So what they're looking at is a lot of the local data.
Local to Wanakee?
Mm-hmm.
Local to Wanakee, okay.
Right. So that is similar to what I showed tonight as an example, right? How many cases and how does it compare to the rest of the county? And I think today might have been the day that they started with half days for grades 3 and 4. But they are really the only one in the county. And I mentioned last time that most districts in the county have no one in session right now at all. So.
Outside of in public schools.
In public schools, yep.
Yes, exactly. Does the superintendent's meeting include some leadership from those schools who are in person in Dane County?
Do you mean private schools?
Yes.
No.
Okay. And have you talked with any of those schools to see how things are going?
Well, I know that we have some pretty regular communication with Edgewood, and Edgewood has decided to remain virtual for a period of time also. But as far as like the smaller private schools, no, I don't have any connection with them other than our Dane County calls that happen on Monday afternoons include private schools, and they're phone calls where they give us an update and then you're allowed to ask questions. They're not the same type of meeting that we have with
More of a report out, just reporting out as opposed to a discussion.
We're active, right?
Do you find that the superintendent and Dane County Health meetings are very, it's a dialogue, or do you feel like it's a report out?
Total dialogue. A lot of questions asked of public health, and really good probing, pushing questions by superintendents, because they are the ones, for the most part, that are working within the districts where people are strongly divided. And it's a challenge. I would definitely say that even the most experienced superintendents have found this to be the most challenging time of their career.
Are most of the districts, where is the decision making happening in most of those districts?
It's a combination of the model we use versus boards making voting on plans that are proposed by the administrative team. So it's a pretty good split.
All the questions I have. Thanks, Leslie.
Yeah.
Krista.
Thanks, Steve. I think this was a really, really important presentation. I hope a lot of people watch it, or we get it out to people, because it really signifies that we're moving forward. I just kind of did a quick calculation. So if we look at, we have about 4,000 students in our district. We know off the top, 25% of those students have chosen Oregon Online. So that's about 1,100 students. So that gets us down to about 2,800. And then you look at, Leslie just said 721 K2 are already in school, which gets us closer down to 2,000. Now we're talking about support hubs. We're engaging students at every level. Then we talk about sports, and we know about 40 to 50% of our students participate in athletics. And now we're talking about fitness center, and we're talking about potentially intramurals, and we're talking about clubs and things, and we're talking about kids in labs. I just think that's really important to note, that we're starting to have a lot more in-person contact with our students, which means we've started our phase in for every grade. And so I just think that that's a really important piece to bring out, and it's not the pace at which everybody wants, but we're starting to move. And that's really, really important, because we know that if we get our teachers in touch with our kids are going to do better. And so I just kind of wanted to make note of that. I just think it's really important. And Kind of going back to some things that Kevin mentioned, and I think somebody else, my popular comment about the survey is kind of taken on a life of its own, and I want to clarify. I think we do need to do a survey where we start asking people at what we have plans available. So we have a phase-in plan for 3-5. We have a phase-in plan for 6. We have a phase-in plan for 7-12. Number one, to make sure everybody is informed about those plans. And then if and when we are ready to go, what are you going to choose? Are you still in this place of, I'm going to go online, or am I ready to go when you say we're ready to go? I think that's very valuable information based on what Anna said too, is that when we heard from Jim Pliner and Shannon, they still needed some prep time based on who's going to be with us when we're in person. And so I think that's valuable information that doesn't preclude us from considering safety and when we're ready to do that. But it's really, really important information. I think, so I guess, that's kind of where I sit with that. I'm really excited about working with Tim and with you, Leslie, on the medical group. I think that's going to give us really good information. Will help inform our decision-making as we move forward. I guess a couple questions I have related to kind of the getting more kids engaged. We do have an OHS fitness center. There's not just winter sports, there's intramurals that we do for students during the winter. We do that at all levels. We have Prairie View did a little running club. So I think if we can be creative about, like Tim said, considering fitness as part of a support hub, I think that would be really helpful. And there's community members that can help us with that too, that have backgrounds in fitness that can safely supervise people. But again, it's another step that we're adhering to Dane County Public Health guidelines, but we're getting kids touches and getting them active and getting them engaged. So I think, that would be a really interesting thing to do. And last I would say is, based on the slide that you showed with the Harvard and Minnesota, and we're less safe than we were a few weeks ago, and that's kind of disappointing. And so I think it points to, it's not just a school district responsibility to get kids back in school, it's a community responsibility. And so I would hope that all of us take that seriously, that we can impact numbers ourselves. And so that's just something I want to put out there. Thanks.
Thank you.
The only comment I have is, it was really helpful to see the slide on the various plans or studies that Public Health of Dane County and Madison utilized to establish their criteria and their thresholds. And for me, what was significant is that, they're not advocating for, virus-free environment or even low, that their model and their cut scores were based upon medium risk of community spread or medium high risk. So that was informative to me. And even with those thresholds, where we're at numerically in Dane County right now is significantly higher than that. So I agree with Krista. We have a responsibility as a community to act in a manner in which we can get those numbers down. So thank you for the presentation. I do note that Mike Doucette and Nate at the auditorium, the PAC, they're doing Clue, I think, instead of doing their musical this year, they're doing online virtual Clue. So if you want to go see that virtually, go to the district website and you'll be able to buy tickets to get a link into that. So anybody have anything else they want to conclude before we move on to the next informational item tonight? I'm looking around. I don't see any. Leslie, thanks so much for putting that together. It was very helpful. So now we're going to talk about summer school report.
We are. So John's going to be right there. John, I'm going to quick send it back one more slide before you get started. I just wanted to give everyone a little update on where we're at with our equity related efforts. We have a big PD session coming up with Nehemiah this week, and we have a meeting with them tomorrow to schedule our next community forum. We're hoping to have a community forum in November. I'm kind of excited about that. We've also completed the staff training for the anti-hate speech policy. We've completed that in every school. And now school groups are preparing lessons for students, and the task force is convening to develop a scope and sequence for student learning. So just wanted to give you that update before I pass the baton to John. John, would you like me to present and you just tell me to move forward, or when to move forward?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep, sounds good. Okay, summer school participation this last year, like everything else, it's been a strange year, but we actually had pretty good participation. So we had 632 students who participated in our all virtual summer school this year. We had 69 classes that were offered. And the pie chart here shows the breakdown of how those were delivered. So we had about 61% that were recorded so that students could do it at any time. And then we had about 39% that were real time. So they were scheduled during the day, students tuned in and had a real live teacher there. So that's obviously the first time we've ever done that. They've all been in person and live before. And we learned some things. You know, some of the things that worked really well were that it was flexible for people if they were taking recorded classes, and so they didn't have to be, they didn't have to worry about conflicts, you know, and they could do it whenever they needed to. They could also do it if they were on vacation somewhere. They could, you know, tune in. Not that many people were traveling, but I know some people made it to some, you know, remote places or camping in Dane County. But that flexible pace and schedule was really nice. People appreciated that. And the people who took the live classes really enjoyed the real-time connections, which was also good because we had kind of wondered if people were going to want to sign up for online classes after the spring ending in a virtual format, but obviously some people did. And there was good feedback for that because they enjoyed seeing teachers. Another thing that worked really well was that we had some attendance was kind of hard to track, especially with the asynchronous ones because you're not there live. You just, you know, the teacher can publish something and students can take it. And, you know, during summer school, we're not quite as stringent with, you know, homework as we might be during the school year. Some, you know, families who enrolled in the recorded sessions didn't necessarily engage in the learning process, or they didn't necessarily attend scheduled office hours to get support from the teacher. That's kind of up to them. There were some technology issues. We learned a lot, which is really helpful. And, you know, for the ones who were synchronous, there were some connectivity issues. A couple times that, you know, Google Meet links weren't working. There was some schedule confusion. And then, you know, getting shut out or removed from class meetings. And most of these were fixed, you know, right away, same day, same class period with the technology help desk support team. The silver lining to this is that we discovered these issues during the summer, so we could fix a lot of them before instruction started up in the fall. Now, granted, during the summer, we still expected to be starting in a hybrid mode with people being in person part of the time and online. But still there was that online component. And so this made the start of the school year go much more smoothly because we already had experienced some of these and either found solutions or knew what to avoid. The other thing that we learned about was the access to materials and supplies. There were some issues with students not always having the same materials and supplies at home to do their best work. That applied both to the asynchronous and synchronous versions. And that's just a matter of, you know, teachers making assumptions about what's available in a typical household, and something that we probably should not make assumptions about. So that's something we learned for next time, to be a bit more proactive and deliberate in providing everything that's needed for the instruction, even if you think, well, of course, people are going to have a bunch of paper clips laying around at home. Well, maybe they don't. So if that's really important, we probably need to give people some paper clips. That's basically it. I'm willing to answer any questions you might have, and I know Brad Ashmore and Jason Zerwick are also available if you have questions for them.
Got to turn my mic on. Tim, anything? You can just give hand signals, yes or no.
Nothing for me, thank you.
Okay, Troy?
Nothing.
Anna, no? Kevin? Heather?
Yeah, I just have one quick one.
Yeah.
I'll play the new board member card. How did this year's numbers compare to last year? For summer school, the 632 and the 69?
Yeah, they were quite a bit lower. They
Obviously,
were a lot
right?
lower. Yeah.
It's not apples to apples.
No, usually we have, instead of the 632 kids, we have over 1,000. So it was quite a bit lower. The classes actually, it was lower than our normal. It was actually higher than we initially thought it would be, because we didn't know, first of all, how many teachers would want to try to sign up for a virtual class.
Sure.
And then we didn't know how many kids would actually take it, so we only ran ones that actually had enough people participate. But it turned out to be pretty good. And actually, there were classes that were taught that we wouldn't have been able to teach in a physical necessarily. So that was kind of, kind of nice.
Good. All right. Thank you. That's all that I had.
Krista, anything?
No.
Okay, and I don't have anything. Thanks, John. Pathways.
I
Who's
get
up?
to do this one too.
You get it too. All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right, so professional learning pathways. As sort of a historical update, June 30th, 2020 marked the end of the third year of our professional development pathway system. We've had the same areas of emphasis for multiple years. The purpose of that being that teachers can stay engaged in deep learning and to develop expertise over time. Education tends to have a reputation of following the bright, shiny new thing and switching from year to year. And Leslie and the other administrators made a commitment to not do that several years ago, because we know that it takes time to really develop expertise in anything. The three strands that we created are strategic and belong to our values and our priorities. So we have the three strands. One is highly effective practices, primarily focused on the meta-analysis of research by John Hattie. The second one is educational equity. And this is, we've been working on this for years through the National Equity Project. And this now we're about a year into partnership with the Nehemiah organization, which Leslie just talked about, the upcoming professional development. And New Educator is a pathway that we're actually expanding from 1 year to 3, as we realize that people need more than just 1 year of that learning and growing in their new professional role. It's important to know that personalized learning, which is one of the board initiatives from years ago, which we've been continuing on for 10 years now, and the whole of this are separate pathways, but they're embedded through the entire process and are an integral component to all three of the pathways. You can go ahead. One note about personalized learning is that it's changing. And I did mention this last year, but I'm kind of repeating some of this for new board members and people who are tuning in. Personalized learning became so much of a buzzword that it stopped meaning a lot, or it meant different things to different people. And so even CISA 1, the Institute for Personalized Learning, has endorsed calling it learner-centered practices instead, because that more closely focuses on what we're actually doing. So we personalize in multiple ways. We personalize the instruction that we give to students via highly effective practices. Goal setting, clarity of learning targets, formative assessment to individual students, and feedback are all very personal. And so they customize the instruction for the student. We also personalize the access to resources that students have based on what they need. And this is where we get into the equitable, not equal allocation of resources. We also personalize the learning via culturally responsive instruction. That's something that obviously has a strong equity component in it. And so one of the things that we look at with equity is how are we being culturally responsive, not just from our frame of reference, but so that we're being responsive and hopefully proactive to the cultural backgrounds of the students that we serve. So we're personalizing in that way. And then we're also personalizing proactively instead of reactively. And this is through universal design for learning, which I will talk about a little bit more later, but basically this is what we're adding on to the highly effective practices. People who have already engaged in the highly effective practices and have kind of, actually go to the next slide, Leslie, I'll just talk about it then. Thank you. You know, we had 4 that we basically focused on. And so we teach an overview course on clarity through learning targets, effective feedback, formative assessment, and goal setting. And some of the examples of, we've done in-house class, and we've also contracted out with other people and had partnerships. So some of those are listed. And universal design for learning, that last one listed there is sort of what we've added on, because some people have said, well, I've been doing the, you know, this highly effective practices, but I've taken all the courses that you've done. And not that people are like, oh, now I'm perfect in formative assessment. Nobody says that. But they're like, okay, what's next? So universal design for learning is really exciting because it's, it allows us to design the learning experiences ahead of time so that they will be personalizable for any of the students who are in it. I think I made that word up. But it's kind of like, it's actually based on the universal design concept from architecture, where in that case, when you build a building, the idea is that if you make that building accessible for people, say in a wheelchair, by putting ramps in, that means it's also accessible to all the people who don't have wheelchairs, who, you know, are walking on 2 legs or walking with a crutch or whatever. And so that universal design concept was transferred over into learning, meaning that if you design a learning environment that's accessible to students who have needs that are sort of outside of the norm or outside of the mainstream, it remains accessible to the people in the mainstream. And so there's a lot of different strategies that teachers can use to design that learning ahead of time, so that whatever students walk into that learning environment, they find a way to access the learning, to engage in the content, and to demonstrate their learning back in a way that fits for them, even if they're not sort of the regular typical student, because regular typical students are actually kind of hard to find. So that's my little intro to universal design for learning, or UDL. Next one. So educational equity is important, and knowing what we mean by equity is actually really important too. So I'm going to read this aloud because we hear the word equity batted around a lot. And this is just kind of a funny aside. I know that none of you would think this, but I heard from someone that another board member, someone else in the state, an educator was telling me that for the longest time, they thought that when we were talking about equity, they were talking about like their home equity, you know, how much they had built up in their home. And it was like after like a year where they're like, oh, and I'm like, oh my goodness, we clearly have not defined this clearly enough. So here we go. Educational equity means each child receives what they need to develop their academic potential. Equity involves ensuring equally high outcomes for all participants in our educational system, removing the predictability of success or failures that currently correlate with any social or cultural factor, interrupting inequitable practices, examining biases, and creating inclusive multicultural school environments for adults and children, and discovering and cultivating the unique gifts, talents, and interests that every human possesses. We can go on to the next one. We have many examples of this because this is something we've been working on for like 4 years, 5 years, actually even before it became a pathway. So we've partnered with the National Equity Project. Obviously, we have the upcoming Nehemiah trainings, the Critical Consciousness Institutes, which people have done, which is a multi-day in-person training. There's multiple classes. The Black History for a New Day class is one that's very popular, that's run by Nehemiah. We did a Teaching for Black Lives book study. The Justified Anger Coalition is also run by Nehemiah. There are teaching tolerance webinars from the Anti-Defamation League that people have participated in. We did Zaretta Hammond, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, shows the intersection between neuroscience and cultural teaching that allows high performance for students. And that was actually stunning. I learned a ton from that. That was great. And this summer especially, we approved a a veritable plethora of anti-racist book studies from various authors. So there are a whole lot of them that I won't name all of them, but we've had about 7,700 hours of professional development from all our staff just in educational equity. That's out of about 15,000 total hours of professional development last year that we did. And so this is a big component of what we're doing. And it shows the commitment of the staff to learn more, to confront our own biases, and to turn that into action. But what we know is that we have to have a good understanding before we turn that into action. Otherwise, we can sort of misfire and cause more harm than good. So this is a great step. This isn't enough, but this shows the commitment to learning and being introspective. So I really applaud our staff for being so proactive about it, because a lot of the book studies and training options, people found themselves and suggested it. All right, let's go to the next one. So Nehemiah, we already talked about this a little bit, but they're helping us a lot by designing and leading the learning sessions for staff, like the one that's coming up on Thursday. The community forum is coming up. They're facilitating multiple ones. They're helping to co-facilitate a K-12 parent group as well. We've done a few of those on our own, and they are also going to help. It also helps that their vice president is a parent in our district with 3 children in our schools. So he's got a great perspective on it, and that's a great partnership there. They're also going to be doing community and staff interviews. Actually, I've already done community and staff interviews. So part of the, getting to talk to people about their real felt experiences. So it's not just dry data. This is really getting the story of what people's experiences are. And they're going to be, Dr. Karen Reese is one of the people on staff there. She's like their head of research. And so she's actually doing this, like the data crunching, statistical analysis, and doing all the data. And so she's going to be making recommendations to guide our future. So this isn't just, hey, here you go, do this thing, that was nice. She's actually looking at, how this affected, the attitudes and the experiences of people based on the training that we did. So they're going to be really helpful, because they've done this with a lot of people. They've been around for like 30 years. And they're in the Madison area, so they have a good understanding of our, Dane County culture. They can really help guide our work. So we're really excited to have them as a partner. All right, moving forward. So this year, 2021, is our format. Like I said before, we added UDL to the highly effective practices pathway, and then we've got that in service. And so this is kind of exciting, this 4th year, because the original plans were written for 3 years. It was kind of a 3-year plan with the 3 pathways, and that was to show that commitment to long-term professional growth. And we knew we would have, new hires every year who had to start from scratch. So we offer introductory classes each year. But then, since this is the 4th year, we're going to keep all those introductory ones and that whole pathway so people can enter at any point wherever they're at. But we need to add some more options for staff who complete all those offerings in the first 3 years, but they want to continue learning. As you know, this is a contractual obligation as well. The board and the referendum that the community passed, which supports the professional development for this, is awesome. It's excellent. It's huge. It's a game changer. And we're so honored, because we talk to people, around Dane County or the state. It's great, because they're like, you have what? Like, you have extra PD days? We're like, yeah, we do. It's awesome. So thank you, because this is really, it's really a game changer. It really helps us. Next slide to close up. This is a unique year. So to address this year's specific challenges, we really focused on highly effective practices. This summer, we ramped that up. And we're really focused specifically on what that looks like in a hybrid and virtual environment. Now, this summer, we really were aiming at hybrid, thinking we might be starting school all in person. We didn't really think we'd be starting school all virtual, but that's where we find ourselves. But anyway, we focused really on how do those practices apply in that environment. We combined some of the training on virtual learning with UDL. So we had a CISA 2 training that they customized for us that combined how do we do UDL in a distance learning format. And so we had a lot of teachers who were like, oh my gosh, how am I going to teach this fall? That was huge. That was great. So they learned not only UDL, but how to do that online. And we're doing a lot of our own, teacher-led trainings, because teachers can say, hey, I'd like to offer this training. We're facilitating that, which is great because it's specific to Oregon's environment. And we have such knowledgeable and skilled teachers who are experts on things that, we've even hired like teachers who were new to us, but come from other places. And we had, a couple teachers who even this summer, like they were hired for like a week. And they're like, hey, I know a ton about this one tool that will really help for online classes. Can I teach a class? Of course, said yes, please do. So it's been great. And then the other thing that we're doing this year is we're really emphasizing social emotional learning, because students need real intentional relationship building. It is very hard online. We learned from some experts in online learning how to intentionally build those relationships in an online format, and that's been huge. So we've really been emphasizing that this year. It's unique. We're learning. A lot of teachers feel like it's their first year teaching. But they're doing a great job of, picking up these skills. We're reaching out to other people. We're tapping our own internal experts, which has really been great, because there's, I think, more sharing, more respect of each other's expertise, and just more collaborative effort toward addressing students' needs the best we can this year than we've had in quite a while. So that's it for the overview, but I'd love to answer any questions that you might have about this.
I'm going to jump in first. John and Leslie, I know we talked through this for a decade and stuff, but when I heard, it's just such a fundamental change in which we've done professional development since we were able to tie it with the compensation system and create an organized system for professional development. I just can't tell folks how radical the change has been and how amazing it is to hear this. So thank you. I just think we've really come a long way from where we were before. John, when I heard you talk about universal design for learning, I remember our conversations about what appeared to be an inherent conflict in terms of standardizing curriculum and meeting the state standards and this personalized or individualized learning. And to me, the universal design for learning looks like the vehicle to meld those. So thank you. That was good to hear. So I don't have any other questions. Tim?
I'm just amazed that with all the things that are going on in the moment, that people are able to and are committed to thinking ahead to professional development. It would just seem to me that I would just be reeling from the changes that have taken place and that are continuing to take place, that this would slip. And I'm impressed by the commitment. I really am, John, to all the teachers who have committed to going beyond the 3-year plan and taking the time to do it. I don't know where they find the time. I really don't. So that's all I had to say.
Okay. Anything?
Did you say Anna?
I said Anna.
Okay, thanks. Tim, what a great comment. I completely agree with you that this is amazing to be in a district where we are scrambling to make decisions every single day on how we're doing business and continuing to focus on how we can do better at all of those things through professional development is just fantastic. I guess I have one question. I'm not sure if you know the answer, but if we're in year 4, have you seen a lot of teachers who maybe did the 3 years of educational equity and now they're transitioning over to highly effective practices for a 3-year stint? Or I guess has there been a shift in what staff have signed up to do now that we're in year 4? You've seen a flip of the people who were doing one and now they're doing the other. I'm just curious to know what that looks like, or if people are excited about what they've been doing for 3 years and wanting to continue in that same program and continue that professional development growth.
Good question. I don't have real hard numbers, but I will say we've been very flexible, and we know that this all works together because when you look at how to be equitable and how to use culturally responsive teaching. Clearly, there are a lot of aspects of formative assessment and feedback and other highly effective practices that are embedded in that. So we've never said like, you can only do from this one pathway. No, I know you want to get equity. No, you can't do that. No, we've always said like, yeah, if you want to go take something out of your pathway, that's totally fine. So this last spring and summer, there was a huge shift, as you saw from just the number of hours that were spent on equity versus highly effective practices. And so I think just that, that sort of awakening or awareness of like, oh my goodness, we need to do more. I need to look at, the cultural, the systemic issues that are around race in the country. I think that was just a real motivating factor that caused a lot of people, maybe not to like officially switch, but just to say, I really need to learn more about this in the moment. And so, we just supported that as much as we could, and found lots of resources and approved a lot of resources that, people brought to us. So I would say that's a big shift that just happened this year. Otherwise, I think as people would sort of finish up with one and switch over, because people were sort of in different areas or different levels of expertise in some of those areas. And so some might have been like, we didn't make people start from scratch if they're already really good in one area, because that would be kind of disingenuous to say, yeah, we're personalizing for kids, but no, you have to go through the same lockstep process and before you can do something. So yeah, we did see people who were like, yeah, I've explored this quite a bit. Now I want to shift over to this other area, or I want to dive deeper in one specific aspect. So this year was kind of an anomaly, but I would say we had a lot into the educational equity in the spring and the summer. And then as the school year got closer, we had a ton more into sort of the nuts and bolts of how do I take the effective practices and apply them in an online, distance, and hybrid learning scenario. So that would probably be the shift that we've noticed the most.
And then one final question, I guess. What's the feedback been from staff, teachers, educators with these pathways? Are you finding that this is helpful, that they're getting positive feedback about all of these opportunities for professional development? It's allowing them to be a better educator. I guess I'm curious to know if this is viewed as a positive for their career and their role in the district, or if you hear people who might have some challenges with the expectations or finding the time to put in this additional effort. So I'm curious to know what kind of feedback you're getting from teachers and staff on these expectations.
Generally, the feedback's been really good. And I'm not just saying that. I mean, obviously there's still some, well, let's put it this way. Finding the time recently has been very difficult. And in fact, in response to that, we made a big extension of the timeline. So during the summer, well, in the spring when all this happened, with the shutdown and then a lot of the, the racial equity issues that happened, there were people who said, one was like, gosh, I had planned to do most of my professional development in like April and May because I was signed up. I mean, there were a lot of conferences that people had signed up for, or book studies or things like that they just got canceled. So we said, okay, well, we'll let you do this like later during the summer. Like you were going to go to, you were going to do this conference or whatever, and it got canceled. So we extended till August. There are other people on the flip side of that said, gosh, I filled up all my hours, and I really want to learn more. And not that I don't want to do it and I wouldn't do it, just on my own, but boy, it'd be really nice if I could get, credit for the students going to be spending a lot of time, not only developing another curriculum, but I really want to dive into this equity. And so we're like, oh yeah, okay. If you want to, technically the clock stops on June 30th and starts July 1st toward getting credit for your hours, for the next year. We were flexible with that because obviously we don't want to say, no, don't learn anything. You can't learn about, racial equity until July 1st. So we were pretty flexible with that too. And a lot of people to go on. So what I think is, I think the positives for it are, one is people see that we've committed to something for long term because, as a teacher myself, nothing was more frustrating than really diving into something and feeling like, yeah, this is where our district's going. And then the next year having it totally switch and like, oh yeah, whatever that was last year, ignore that. We're doing something different, this year. And so what I think people have appreciated is the ability to count on the fact that they're going to be diving into something that is deep and it's sustained. Second part is it actually really helps. These are things that they can use. We make an effort to be practical about it, not just theoretical. So that's helpful. And it's also relevant. We are responsive to people's requests. So there's a lot of flexibility. If it doesn't fit into those, like we have a specific category as well. It's not a pathway, but obviously there's a lot of, like there's new things in science and social studies and math, and you want to offer that as well. And so we have the flexibility there so that people can still feel like they can dig down into their content area and become even more expert on that. And so I think that's helpful too. So generally it's really positive. I mean, the negative parts are, boy, there's a ton of like record keeping involved in this. So it would be a nightmare to do this in paper. Leslie researched some options years ago and purchased a program which not everyone loves, but it's a much more efficient way to do paperwork. But I will say, not the most thing in the world. But it's way better than the alternative. But some people don't like it. Overall, though, we've had very few people met the requirement. I mean, most people go way farther above their contracted requirements, that they're actually paid for. And that's just kind of the nature of teaching, is you keep on learning and growing. So, the fact that people do it and they exceed the expectation is great. So I take that as a real positive because people enjoy what we're doing. They find it relevant and it's helpful to their practice.
Thank you very much for that. That's all that I have.
Kevin, anything?
No questions, just very interesting being new. So good work.
Troy.
Yeah, real quick, I would just echo Tim and Anna's comments about just it's amazing that we're continuing to see the professional development occur, despite all of the other challenges. And I'm really fascinated by how much this current environment really provides learning opportunities for our educators as we work towards this universal learning and, going beyond this year when we're back in person, and it's fascinating to think of how much these opportunities are going to carry over into the future. So just one quick question, I guess, on your last bullet point here, John, on the social emotional learning. Do you have an example of what that looks like virtually as to how teachers are able to teach that social emotional learning in a virtual environment?
Yeah, so we have social emotional learning coaches, and so that's something that they kind of ramped up and developed a toolkit that teachers could use. So they have a variety of activities that they can use for that. And so what's kind of interesting is it's different by age level, but some of it is not all that different. So I guess some examples would be some are just like virtual versions of what teachers already do. Like they have morning meetings, morning messages. We use the zones of regulation as a standard, but we've been using that for years. And so the zones of regulation are how we talk to students about, okay, what zone are you in? And that's kind of their cue to look at their feelings and talk about, well, I'm kind of in red right now. I'm having a hard time. It's like, okay, well, what can we do to, help you move to yellow or green? That's something that you do a little bit differently in an online format than, in person. We also have they have daily digital check-ins. This is for younger students, but you can do, it's sort of like it's an electronic version of what we typically do in the classroom, like a PBIS, like behavior management and reinforcement system. So you have a digital version of what you would do in the classroom where you have, check-ins with the students to say like, okay, what are our goals for, the next however many minutes, how are you feeling today? Even things like, hey, today we're going to teach a mindfulness activity. So we're going to do like breathing activities like belly breaths. How do you calm yourself down? And then, things like some of it's mindfulness, think about something, that you experienced, or if you have stress and you think, so I'm not a touchy-feely kind of guy usually, so some of this sounds kind of silly, but I hear for elementary students, it's great. So it's like, pretend you're blowing bubbles away with your cares, and stuff like that. And then there's like character traits that they go through. So in addition to like the zones of like, how are you, they talk about character traits, like, how can you be, curious or kind or determined? What kind of, what do you want to develop with that for, for today? So there's tons of stuff with like the zones of regulation. And then some of it has to do with like, just like emotional check-ins. There's a virtual calming room that I've never used, but I've always been kind of curious because I don't know how that works. So I really want to try that. But that's something that you'll see in a lot of Google Classrooms where it's like, hey, if you're having a hard time, here's a virtual, calming room that you can go to. So a lot of that stuff, breathing exercises, talking about emotions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of that carries over. The zones of regulation, I think, is certainly something that works virtually. So thanks, John. That's all.
Who did I miss? I lost track.
You can go, Krista.
Krista, yeah.
Sorry, I know we're getting upon the hour. So I'll put just a couple of example questions. First, I want to give a shout out to Leslie. You were a director of instruction for a lot of years, and it'd be really fun, is the right word, for you to all come to fruition. You and John have spent a ton of time together really developing this, so kudos to you guys for that. Secondly, just kind of an observation that, we've had feedback that has not been positive about virtual instruction, and we can't help, I'm sure teachers can't help but take that personally. And so from my perspective, listening in on my son, who's a freshman, his classes, and his gym teacher giving him workouts and demonstrating them, and listening to an Algebra 2 class and listening to an English class, I have been so amazed at the way our teachers have adapted and been innovative. And so I guess the other thing is, we've moved away from more of a focus on structures to really self and strategy in our teaching. And one of those components is students being responsible for their learning, right? So in a sense, given we've gone to a virtual environment and we've started down this road of students being more responsible for their learning, and some of the feedback we're hearing is students are having troubles being responsible for their learning, does that impact your teaching in a non-virtual environment, I guess? Have we learned some things on that? So Leslie, I don't know if you want to comment, or do you want to comment on that?
It really points out the necessity of student empowerment and student agency, which are all the things, kind of that we've been talking about, how we want to develop in students. And it is fascinating because a lot of the difficulties we hear are things like, I don't know how to get my kid to do things, or they really struggle with time management and, motivation, or, figuring out why we're doing this. And that's kind of interesting because those were things we've been struggling with for, probably hundreds of years in education, but I know at least, 15 years here I've been in Oregon, those have been the same things. It's just that some of those we kind of propped up with a crutch, because you don't have to be really good at your own time management when a bell rings every 42 minutes and you move to the next place and there's somebody standing there telling you what to do, who can physically get close to you and make you do something. So when you are not physically present, it really does rely on the student to take ownership of that and to be self-motivated. So I think that's, it basically makes it a lot more real, when you take away some of those structures. So it shows the importance of it.
I think I'll add one more thing too, is to me, it's highlighted the importance of our leaning into the AVID program. Because the AVID program at the high school level is the intentional teaching of those skills. And in the middle school level, which, you know, in the middle of all of this, we're not going to implement AVID at the middle school. But moving forward, intentional teaching of some of those strategies earlier on in the student's learning experience is really important.
And then my next question is, thank you for that. You know, when we look at highly effective practices, you have part of that, that teachers are going to other teachers' rooms that potentially are not the same subject, but they're getting constructive feedback. And it's kind of this concept of moments of truth, that in their teaching, they're getting feedback. And so I guess I'm kind of looking to apply that with our equity. A lot of what we're doing is proactive. We're looking at instruction, we're looking at a curriculum. And maybe this is part of Nehemiah or things that I don't know, but there's a lot of things associated with equity that are reactive, not proactive. And there's moments of truth when situations happen and it's potentially not in a classroom. So I guess my question is, what are we doing as part of that equity that helps our teachers act and know what to do in those moments of truth that are reactive situations, not proactive situations?
That's definitely part of what we're discussing with Nehemiah, is teaching some intentional strategies. And clearly our staff, they know what to do. But sometimes I think in really difficult situations, you might struggle for the words.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that Nehemiah is helping us with. And I also know that there's a recently released excellent guide that came from DPI called Culturally Responsive Problem Solving, which also helps us have some of those moments of truth when problem solving for students who are struggling behaviorally or academically, because it highlights vulnerable decision-making points and talks specifically about strategies that teams can use to counteract bias in each of those decision-making points. So it's a couple of different pieces, right? It's about how to be effectively reactive, which how often do we ever get to say that, right? And then also building our proactive strategies.
Great, thank you. I mean, this is dynamite. This is the really important stuff, because there's a lot of uncertainty right now, but what we know sure is that teachers are the number one determinant in a student success in school. So really important work. Thank you, guys.
All right. I think I got everybody right. Anybody I miss? All right, we are nearing our witching hour, folks. And we have, Gina had about a half an hour at least presentation on bargaining. I think we're going to move that. It's just that we need to be sharp when we talk about, it's just getting late. So I think we're going to bag the closed session. And I'll work with Gina and Laura on that issue. Leslie, what about the equity update?
That I did as the slide that was an introduction to John. So
Okay.
I kind of checked it off the list a little earlier.
Okay, good. So we've got that off. So we just need to have fresher minds when we walk into some of the financial stuff and the schedules. So we're gonna move that to another meeting. So that takes us to superintendent's update.
Thank you. I'll be very brief because I do see the time. And the one thing I wanted to highlight based off of John's presentation is that our professional learning pathways is a significant recruitment tool. That is one of the things that you're able to discuss with people when they're deciding to come here, and oftentimes even when they're deciding to come here and taking a bit of a pay cut to do so. It's something that is attractive to people who are coming from other places. The amount of time and energy that we put into all of us collectively continuing to get better at our craft and doing better things for kids. So I just want to put that out there because we know that we'll need to be continually more creative in our recruitment as fewer and fewer elect to go into the teaching profession. And then also, I don't know how many of you saw, OCA made a 9-minute video on the online learning experiences of a family. And I think that's something that we're putting out on our social media if we haven't already. It really is a good example of some of the things that John spoke about related to social emotional learning, because one of the students in the video does talk about how she tells her teacher how she's feeling the day, and she shows your screen. So it's a great example of how some things play out for our younger students. Other than that, I think I'll wrap it up with just those 2 items.
Good. That takes us to closing agenda. I know that for our November, I think 9th meeting.
Mhm.
Yeah, we're going to get a report from you on the surveys.
Yes.
Probably another update on, the school reopening plan, the phased restart, and that would include a report from you, Tim, and Krista on the medical review group that we talked about. We expect that. So then we'll continue to work with that. As usual, if anybody has any agenda item that they'd like put on, let us know. Anything now, or just contact Leslie and I, we'll get something on the agenda. If not, I'm going to bag checkout too, unless somebody ever really wants something on checkout. Given the hour, then we need one more motion.
I'll move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second, this is Anna.
Call the roll.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Ms. Garrison,
Yes.
Mr. Meering,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes, motion carries. We are adjourned at 10 o'clock. Thanks, everyone, for a good meeting. Be safe.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.